Chapter 16. You loved me without words. Like the river loves the moss. Like the full moon loves still water. Talorcan turned slowly, and for one eternal instant time seemed to hold its breath. There she was. His chest tightened, and a wave of heat swept through him under the burning weight of her gaze. God, he thought, feeling his certainties crumble beneath the mystery of those eyes. They were like the stormy North Sea, dark, unpredictable, and profoundly beautiful. There was something in her, a barely restrained fragility, an unaffected beauty, that stirred memories in him he did not possess. He understood then how this tiny woman had unleashed chaos upon his home. She was like an ancient siren's song, not with shrill voices but with a sensual murmur that promised depth. One hand rested gracefully on the marble banister, the other on her belly, as if pondering some secret that might dwell within her. Perhaps she could have claimed what wasn't hers. But she hadn't. He hadn't taken that woman's virginity, or anyone's. Because if he ever did, he would never leave her alone. His honor would not allow it. He fixed his eyes on her with silent resolve. If this woman lay in his bed, it would be to stay. He would want her warm and trembling in his arms, sunk into the heat of his chest, to love again and again until the world faded away. There was something ancestral in his blood that answered her. The girl's hair fell in a cascade of pale gold, as if twilight itself had been trapped between her strands. She had a wild beauty, made of subtle asymmetries, and a sweet gesture as she blew her fringe from her eyes. She was small, yes, but with curves that could unnerve even the steadiest man. And her dress, lavender, his favorite color revealed by some unspoken spell, clung to her shape with a boldness that was not quite vulgar, leaving his imagination suspended between desire and reverence. She had high cheekbones, a straight, elegant nose, brows drawn upward to the sky, and eyes light of Celedan. The way she looked at him burned on his skin. It was as if she knew him. As if she had loved him already, in another time or another world. And Shannon, his sharp old father, did not let the moment pass. Now tell me again you don't know her, boy, he said with veiled mockery. Because she seems to know you quite well. Talorcan shook his head, overwhelmed by a strange certainty he couldn't grasp. He couldn't look away. Her eyes spoke to him in a forgotten language, as if claiming something he didn't yet know he'd lost. Who was this delicate creature who had crashed into his world with such weight? He had known beautiful women, yes, his former suitors were the finest in the Highlands, but none had ever made him feel this mix of hunger and possession, this need both visceral and spiritual. And that certainly was a bad omen for his plans of an arranged marriage. I swear, father, he said at last, raising his hands in surrender. I've never seen her before in my life. Shannon crossed his arms and regarded him with suspicion. Then why is she looking at you like you're her destiny? And if you didn't sleep with her last night, how do you explain the state in which she arrived? The girl's voice rose, hesitant. Oh God. Do you think he? Her voice faded into a sigh. She bit her lip and looked away, as if fearing the judgment of her own heart. Talorcan waited. Speak please, he thought, willing her to defend his honor. To save him. Well. Shannon pressed. Was it him who took you last night? She hesitated, glancing between both men, and finally shook her head in a small, nearly imperceptible motion. Talorcan breathed for the first time in minutes. See? Told you, Pa, he said, relieved. I don't need to seduce maidens. Plenty of women come to me without tricks. But when she looked at him with wounded fury, his relief turned to confusion. Why was she offended by something that hadn't happened? Forgive the blunt question, girl, said Shannon plainly. But who was it then? Someone from our clan? Typical of his father, if he believed a woman had been dishonored under his roof, he would find the man and make him repair the wrong. Talorcan knew this. And so, partly to prove to himself that none of this affected him, he turned on his heels, ready to leave, when he heard her again. "He did it," she said, with a mix of defiance and shame. Talorcan turned slowly. That statement hit him hard. "But I wanted him to," she added softly, as if desire carried its own weight. The world crumbled beneath his feet. How dared she? What if Ethne, his betrothed, heard of this? What if his father believed it? How could he undo such a dangerous lie now? In 3 strides he reached her, lifted her with one arm and tossed her over his shoulder, his hand brushing a hip he had not sought, but which stirred something furious within him. Ignoring Shannan's protests, he walked to the door, opened it, and with a rough motion dropped the girl inside the chamber, like one casting off a temptation that reeked of chaos. He slammed the door shut, bolted it, and leaned back against it with crossed arms, as if he could seal the entire world out of his body. As if, instead of a young woman, he had locked away a cataclysm dressed in lavender. "And let that be the end of it," he said firmly. But neither his tone nor his posture convinced anyone. Not even himself. And when he saw his father, dumbfounded and speechless for the first time in his life, he knew with certainty that this was no end. It was a beginning. Had he been a superstitious man, he might have believed he heard the wheels of fate turning, grinding toward a course from which he would never escape. Aeryn emerged from the foliage with a scowl, yanking the thorny leaves tangled in her hair. Barely a few hours had passed since she'd walked away from that cursed threshold, and there she was again, on hands and knees begging for entry like a nameless outcast. "Let me in," she cried, voice trembling, chin raised as if the wind itself might carry her plea to the other side of the door. But the wood remained unmoved, sealed like an ancient secret. She sank back on her heels, pounding the door with her fist. Inside, the murmur of a heated argument echoed like some relic from ages past. She knew they wouldn't hear her. Closing her eyes, she took a deep breath, and bitterly thought a hot cup of coffee and a dose of logic might have restored her sanity. But emotion, that unknown star that eclipsed all reason, had seized her judgment the moment Talorcan turned away. She had said exactly the worst thing she could say. A visceral mistake, born from the raw wound of not being recognized by him, of seeing in his eyes the void reserved only for strangers. She had expected it. She knew it. And still, her heart wasn't ready for the coldness of that rain-swept gaze once full of promise. Talorcan was devastating in any century. Even when she thought he was mad, he had seemed dangerously attractive. But in his natural setting, dressed like a true 16th-century lord, he radiated a kind of authority and magnetism that defied reason. He was the perfect reflection of a man who embraced his fate with ancestral pride. When she first saw him again after returning, she had stood at the top of the stairs, gazing down at him with her soul in her eyes. But the reunion had been cruel. Shannan, the wise man with a distant stare whom she'd mistaken for Einstein, had mentioned her possible pregnancy. Vertigo had overtaken her. Pregnant. Before she'd even had coffee. And then Talorcan, with his dark hair thrown back, looked at her. His eyes shone, but not with recognition. And after a biting remark about women competing for a place in his bed, he turned his back on her. Wounded and overwhelmed, she said what she knew would make him turn around. But it wasn't wisdom that spoke through her, it was the desperate need not to feel erased. She had traded the promise of a future for the cruel comfort of the present. Now, leaning against the door that would not open, she pleaded once more. "Let me in. I need to tell you the truth." But the rising storm of voices inside surged like a wall she could not scale. She stood, brushing the leaves from her dress, and circled the structure, curious to see the castle in full daylight. That was when time seemed to stop. There he was. Frozen at the edge of morning, descending the steps toward her, dressed in leather trousers and a linen shirt open at the chest, sunlight crowning him in gold. He was smiling. And that smile was everything her heart remembered. But still, behind her, she could hear Talorcan's shouting from inside the castle. They couldn't both exist. Not by any law of physics, she knew. Then she understood, one of them was her Talorcan. The other had to be something else. And if both were him, would kissing one be a betrayal of the other? The thought made her blush, but she didn't hesitate. With a trembling sigh, she ran to him. He caught her in the air, laughing, as she wrapped her legs around his waist like time didn't exist between them. "Kiss me," she whispered. "Och, English girl," he purred. "I'll kiss you until time itself shatters." And he did. His mouth tasted of cinnamon and longing, his kiss was hot, skilled, and yet something was off. That unmistakable spark was missing, that electric jolt that made him hers. Then the door burst open behind them, and the real Talorcan stormed out like a Celtic wolf. In an instant he tore her from the imposter's arms, holding her fiercely. She blinked, staring between the two. Twins. Identical. But now she saw it, one with pale blue eyes, the other dark. One with a deep, steady voice, the other with quick words and a more playful grin. "Who are you?" Talorcan growled, rubbing the spot where she'd kicked him. "I've been trying to tell you," Aeryn snapped, hands on her hips and fire in her eyes. "But every time you hear something you don't understand, instead of asking, you just growl like a barbarian." Caelan, because she finally understood the other was his brother, raised an amused brow. "For someone so small you've got the fire of a banshee," he murmured. "And you can't hold that fire in your hands," Talorcan spat, still furious. "I'm not looking for someone to claim me," Aeryn fired back. "I'm looking for someone with a shred of intelligence." Shannon, the druid with ink-stained fingers, stepped forward with the calm of one who had seen centuries pass. "That would be me, my dear," he said with a gentle bow. "At least you ask questions before you start roaring," Aeryn replied, taking his arm and walking into the castle without a backward glance. The door shut with a sharp bang. Behind it, the echoes of ancient bloodlines, forgotten legacies, and lost hearts still pulsed through the stone. And time, unmoved, wove its invisible threads between them. Chapter 17. Aeryn shook her head for the third time, her voice low, almost hurt. "I can't tell you, Shannon," she murmured, already regretting having entered with him. Since crossing the castle walls, she had felt the target of a silent but persistent inquisition. She couldn't speak. Not yet. She would only speak with Talorcan. Only to him did she owe the truth, and only he could decide what to do with it. She had already made one mistake that morning, she wouldn't make another. "Then what can you tell me?" "Anything. Anything at all," Shannon insisted, his patience tense. Aeryn sighed. It had taken only a moment to grow fond of Talorcan MacRhean. It was an instinctive, puzzling feeling. She had felt it when she saw him standing at the entrance, questioning his son with a look full of paternal love. And for a fleeting moment, she had envied that kind of love, wondering what it felt like to be the center of such concern. The old man not only resembled Einstein with his white mane, olive skin, and brown eyes ringed with wrinkles, but also radiated the sharpness of someone who saw beyond appearances. Sitting at the edge of the hearth in the great hall, Aeryn fixed her gaze on the door. She longed for Talorcan to enter. Whether he was angry or not, she needed to speak with him. Desperately. "I told him my name," she answered evasively. "That doesn't tell me much except that you have some Irish ancestor, and a damn strange accent." "How did you meet Talorcan?" Aeryn watched him cautiously, measuring her trust. "How am I supposed to help you, girl, if you refuse to tell me anything?" the old man asked with genuine concern. "If my son took your virtue, then he must marry you. But I can't force him if you don't tell me who you are or what happened." "Mr. MacRhean." "Shannon," he interrupted. "Shannon," Aeryn corrected softly. "I don't want you to force Talorcan to marry me." "Then what do you want?" he exclaimed in disbelief. "To know what day it is," Aeryn replied, hating that she had to ask so directly. But she needed to. She needed it urgently. If Caelan still lived, it meant she had arrived in time. But she wouldn't know for sure until she knew the exact date. Shannon fell silent. His eyes narrowed, his body seemed to straighten in alertness. For a moment, Aeryn had the strange impression that this man not only listened with his ears nor observed with his eyes. She felt he was reading her with some other sense, deeper and more ancient. And she knew she was right when he whispered, "Oh girl, you come from a very distant place, don't you? Don't answer. I don't fully understand what I perceive, but I know you are not from this land. Are you reading my mind? Can you do that?" she asked with a start. What else could she not believe from a man who had raised a son capable of manipulating time? "No. But I hear echoes. Words in their oldest form. None of my sons managed to master that language, though I tried to teach them." "Is it the date you need?" he finally said slowly. "Will you tell me, Aeryn Morwyn, if I answer? Isn't there another way?" He shook his head, a slight smile playing on his lips. "I will answer as honestly as I can," she conceded, "but there are things I still cannot reveal." "That's enough. As long as you don't lie, we will understand each other. If you can't tell me what happened last night, at least tell me why you can't." That was acceptable. "Because I must speak with Talorcan first. Only he should hear it. If afterward he decides to share it with you, I accept. But not before." Shannon held her gaze, probing the truth of her words. At last he spoke. "Today is January 20th. A month," Aeryn thought, relieved. When Talorcan had awakened in her time, he had said, "By Bridget's flame, I haven't lost a mere moon, I've lost centuries." Back then, he had believed he had been gone for a month, perhaps since mid-February. He also mentioned that Caelan had died recently. Aeryn never knew how recent that pain was. Now she understood that Caelan's death was imminent. Weeks, perhaps days. She had to prevent it. And fast. 1472, she asked, hating to waste a question on something so obvious, but she needed to confirm. Talorcan had gotten the day and month wrong, he might have gotten the year wrong too. Shannon's eyes lit up with a mixture of fascination and suspicion. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Where are you from?" he insisted in a low voice. Aeryn averted her gaze, afraid of what he might read in her eyes. For the first time, she was distracted by the details of the great hall. The polished stone floor, the vibrant tapestries on the walls, the hunting dogs dozing beside a magnificent wooden table. The velvet curtains, the stained glass, the coats of arms. It was a place worthy of legend. "From a place you've never heard of," she said, avoiding a clear answer. "Tell me, or you won't get any more answers. Telling me where you come from can't reveal that much, or can it?" Aeryn let out a frustrated sigh. "America. Far away, across the ocean. And what year are you from?" Shannon studied her again with relentless attention. 1472, he nodded. "And I know of the Indies. We don't call them that, but the Scots knew them centuries ago." "That's not true." "It was Christopher Columbus." "No, they followed Sinclair's roots, who inherited ancient Templar maps." "Wow. You Scots are arrogant." "Just enough," he replied with a smile that softened the wrinkles on his face. "I like you, girl. When do you plan to tell Talorcan everything? Then I can finally hear the full story." "As soon as he comes in. And thanks for giving me an easy question." "Hey. That wasn't fair," he protested. "That wasn't a... You can't take it back now." "That was a question." Shannon sniffed, but his eyes sparkled with admiration. "You're a smart girl, huh? Then tell me, is Caelan planning any trips soon?" "What a strange question," he said, stroking his chin. "You've fully awakened my curiosity. Yes, he must soon go to the lands of the MacRhean. Did Talorcan take your virtue?" Aeryn exhaled slowly. "It's a complicated story. And I need to talk to Talorcan, as soon as possible. His son is in danger. And even though he trusts me, he must decide what can be said. I can't say more until then. Please respect that," she added in a low, almost pleading tone. Shannon raised an eyebrow but nodded gravely. When he took her hand in his, Aeryn felt a strange, intimate warmth. She didn't remember her own father ever doing anything like that. Shannon held her hand a few moments longer, his gaze thoughtful. And then she knew, with a slight shiver, that he wasn't just looking at her, he was trying to look inside her. Was that possible, she wondered with a tremble.
Very well, my dear, he said finally.
You've won. No more questions until you speak with Talorcan. But if I know my son, it won't be easy. He must hear me, Shannon, Aeryn said urgently. Time is running out. Is he really in danger? Aeryn closed her eyes and nodded. Everyone is. Shannon was silent for a moment, then smiled with a trace of melancholy gravity. Then we'll make sure he listens. Aeryn opened her eyes, frowning.
And how do you plan to do that?
Lock us in a room. Shannon's smile widened with noble mischief. He was an old man, yes, but still imposing, still charming. Aeryn wondered why he hadn't remarried, though judging by his spirit, surely not for lack of suitors.
Not a bad idea, my dear.
Will you do as I say? Aeryn hesitated, then nodded. And Shannon, leaning forward slowly, began whispering his plan into her ear. Chapter 18. Hours later, Aeryn paced anxiously in front of the fire in the chamber of the ancient jade, caught in a growing impatience. The day had dragged on endlessly, with no sign of Talorcan. If he returned alone, maybe she could finally clear everything up. Maybe they could begin to unmask the enemy. The day had passed without meaning. After sharing breakfast with Shannon in the gallery, a hearty mix of eggs, potatoes and cured fish, Nerya had guided her on a brief tour of the castle, showing her rooms and ornaments. Then Aeryn had spent hours in the library before retiring to her room, where she waited in vain. Caelan had returned without his brother, saying they had separated at the tavern. Shannon, aware of both their plans, had cracked open the corridor door, waiting for the exact moment Talorcan would return. He had seen him arrive just over an hour ago, entering the stables. I can't believe you put her in the room next to Talorcan's, Caelan murmured disapprovingly behind his father's back. Shannon shrugged calmly. She revealed her name last night, and besides, that room is the third most beautiful in the castle. Only yours surpass it in splendor.
I'm not sure she should sleep that close to him.
And where do you suggest moving her? Closer to yours? Shannon replied with a raised eyebrow. Talorcan claims he doesn't know her. You, however, kissed her. Who do you think is more risk to her? Aeryn averted her gaze, burning with shame. Caelan, with that boldness shining in his eyes and gestures, looked at her as if he knew more than he said. He was as devastating as his brother, but with a different edge, more playful. How could one castle hold such masculinity? Seeking another focus for her mind, she turned to Shannon. Why are you helping me? Don't trouble yourself with my reasons, my lady, he replied with an enigmatic smile. You should, Caelan interrupted. Father rarely gets involved without a second motive. There are always layers beneath layers and secrets woven like ancient roots. Shannon gave him a sidelong glance. I'm not the only one who keeps secrets, lad. The two men held each other's gaze for a few seconds, like two branches of the same tree facing a silent storm. Aeryn felt she was missing something important. Something deep and hidden. Are you sure it's necessary to go to such extremes? She asked, uneasy at the sight of planks and bolts stacked by the door. You accused him of stealing your honor, Shannon answered. He won't listen if he can avoid it. Caelan nodded gravely. He's coming. To the privy, my lady, Shannon ordered. When you hear him enter his room, count to 10. Then join him. We'll lock both doors. He won't leave without hearing you. Heart pounding, Aeryn obeyed. From the shadows, she heard Talorcan's door open. She counted. 1, 2, 10. Then she stepped out. He stood with his back to her, facing the fire, dark hair falling over his linen shirt and leather pants. He looked like a warrior from an ancient dream, one of those books she used to buy in secret. But she had to survive the storm that was Talorcan MacRhean. The sound of the door made her turn. He turned too. No more lies, Englishwoman, he said, voice soft but dangerous. Don't provoke me, or I'll make true the accusation from this morning. Aeryn took a deep breath. She would be rational. Direct. Without emotion.
I'm not trying to force you to marry me.
Good, he growled, because I won't. He approached like a wolf, using his body to intimidate her. Aren't you afraid of me? You should be, he said, lifting her by the arms as if they were wrought iron. Shannon and Caelan, she thought, must be listening. But they were wrong if they thought Talorcan would scream. He was a man of silences. And that was worse. Answer me. Are you foolish enough not to fear me? She tried to start her explanation, but his closeness clouded her mind. Please. Please what? Kiss me. Make me yours. His voice was tempered fire. Aeryn shook her head vehemently. I'm not a witch. I haven't bewitched you. Aren't you? He whispered. Because I'm enchanted. I can't stop thinking about you. You've pierced me to the bone. And he pushed her onto the bed. Aeryn fell onto the velvet cushions, and he loomed over her like an ancient shadow. She tried to resist, but their bodies already spoke a language words denied. I can't talk to you like this, she said, closing her eyes.
Then don't talk, he murmured, moving closer.
Their lips were about to brush, when the privy door slammed open with a sharp noise. Ahem, Shannon cleared his throat. Talorcan froze. Get out of my room, Pa. This is my business. I only came to see if Aeryn needed help, Shannon said with feigned innocence.
She doesn't.
She's woven her web with lies. Don't blame me for falling into it. Are you all right, my lady? Shannon asked.
Yes, Aeryn said calmly.
You can leave. You too, Caelan.
Someone's going to get ruined.
Shannon looked at them for a moment longer, then bowed and left. Talorcan stepped away from the bed and took a few steps.
What did Shannon mean by someone?
Who am I ruining? She didn't answer. But he looked at her with those eyes where time passed slower like stone and steel, where desire still burned, but also doubt. She stood, heart still racing. She knew the battle was not over. It was just beginning.
Speak, he ordered.
Why are you here? What do you want from me? And in that instant, Aeryn felt her fate, tied to his by invisible ancient threads, hung on what she was about to say next. While the flames crackled softly in the stone fireplace, she sat before the fire, legs drawn up and eyes lost in the hypnotic dance of the embers. Talorcan silently poured some whiskey into a glass and leaned elegantly against the hearth's mantel. His eyes studied her discreetly over the rim of the glass, with the gravity of one contemplating a mystery. The presence of that woman was a spell in itself. Not only because of her dazzling beauty, which unsettled him to the core, but also for how she had upended his world from the very first moment. Her boldness, her impossible words, and above all, the visceral attraction she stirred in him, one that disarmed him more than any lie. At first he had only wanted to intimidate her, to push her onto the bed with cold arrogance. But he had touched her, and she, as if answering an ancient rite, had intertwined her ankles with his legs, and he had sunk into the soft, welcoming warmth of her body. If his father hadn't interrupted them, he would still be there, fused in her flesh, defeated by the spell of that strange woman. Since she had crossed the castle's gates, he felt her essence soaking into the very stones. Just looking at her awakened something long forgotten in his soul. She had told the truth, he couldn't get her out of his mind for a moment. Even in the tavern, surrounded by damp tables and rancid smells, the memory of her scent called to him, a clean aroma, wet like spring rain, with a hint of vanilla and a mystery that brushed against the sacred. Are you smiling? He asked without looking away.
What? She looked at him puzzled.
I said, are you smiling? She gave a faint smile. A small dimple appeared on her left cheek. A tiny hollow. Talorcan exhaled heavily. His gaze lingered on her features, stopping at the witch's mark that adorned her cheekbone. How many more did she have, hidden in secret corners of her skin? He would have liked to discover them one by one, trace them with his tongue, lose himself in the softness of the hollow that peeked above her neckline. He shook his head impatiently, trying to banish those thoughts.
What was so important, that you decided to lie to me this morning just to get my attention, my lady?
Aeryn, she corrected him absently, biting her lower lip, a gesture that unsettled him more than he wanted to admit. The moon goddess, he thought. And she certainly looked like one. You already know my name, she added. And since you demand such familiarity, not only will I not call you my lady, but I will insist that you call me my lord. She frowned but remained silent. That composure annoyed him more than a heated reply. He preferred her unbalanced, impulsive. That way he felt he still had control. I don't know where to start, but I beg you to listen to me until the end, she said, lowering her gaze. Once you know the whole truth, you'll understand. He watched her with distrust. Sinan had hinted she believed she was in danger. What harm was there in listening? Besides, if he didn't, his brother would insist until it became a nuisance. And he couldn't keep avoiding Neria's stews, nor her elderberry tea as dark as sin. No, he needed to resolve this. The sooner he did, the sooner he could get her out of his life. He sank into a seat with resignation. She hesitated, then spoke softly. You're in danger, Talorcan. I guessed, he said, raising an eyebrow with a low laugh. Though I suspect we're talking about different dangers. Your life is in danger. He released a low laugh, one eyebrow raised. And you'll come to save me, little one? Fight my enemies. Bite their ankles. Ooh, what absurd arrogance. If you don't listen to me, I'll have no choice but to try. Very well. I'm listening. But afterward, you'll leave. He planned to ask Neria to send her to town, or perhaps Caelan to escort her to Edinburgh. He had to get her away before doing something foolish. Like, for example, taking her into his arms again and losing himself in her until dawn. Don't you even want to know what kind of danger it is? You promised to tell the whole story. Do it. And end this. Maybe you should sit. No. Speak. She took a deep breath. Her voice was fragile but determined. I come from the future, the 21st century. I was walking through the hills near Loch Daraneth when I fell into a cave and found you. Asleep. He closed his eyes with regret. She was crazy. Absolutely crazy. You had symbols painted on your chest. When I fell on you, you woke. You helped me out. You told me you were from the 16th century, that you had been bewitched. That someone sent you to a cave with a promise. If you wanted to know who had killed your brother, you had to come. You went, and there you were betrayed and put to sleep. Talorcan frowned. Dead brother? He had no dead brother. Caelan was alive and well. I didn't believe you at first, Aeryn continued, ignoring his skepticism. But you asked me to take you to Brathran to prove your words. We went to the stone circle. This castle, was nothing but ruins. You made me cross the circle. And you sent me here to your time. He snorted. The old legends about the ancestors of Caer Thalanis resurfaced, like an annoying echo. And before sending you, he interrupted sarcastically, I took your virginity, right? How convenient. For the last time, she growled with restrained fury, I'm not trying to marry you, you stubborn caveman. You couldn't. I'm promised. Promised. Since last Christmas. Ethne MacLear will arrive soon for our wedding. Aeryn turned to hide the trembling that shook her. He was promised, to the woman whose death he himself had told her about. And if she saved Caelan, she would also save that woman. The one who would take the place his heart had already claimed. She swallowed the bitterness rising in her throat like gall. Talorcan, in the future, before sending me, you told me to tell your story to the you of the past and to show you something. It was my backpack. It contained things from my time. Proof. But it disappeared. Convenient, he muttered cynically. The future you thought you'd be smart enough to believe me. I'm beginning to think he gave you more credit than you deserve. Enough insults. Remember who gives you shelter. It was true. She depended on him.
But she couldn't just stand by while everything fell apart.
What if he never believed her? What if she failed? I know you don't believe me, she said in barely audible voice, but there is. Chapter 19. So? Shannon asked, strolling slowly through the great hall, his steps deliberate like a man used to thinking in centuries. Does she still claim that you stole her virginity? Talorcan leaned back in his chair, somber. He finished the remnants of whiskey in his glass, and rotated it between his hands without taking his eyes off the fire. The orange glow danced across his face, but his mind was elsewhere. He thought of his future wife, the duties awaiting him, but also of the fascinating woman sleeping in the next room. The warmth of the liquor loosened his tensions, and through that haze of smoke and memory, the situation began to take on an almost ironic tone.
Oh yes, he replied with a crooked smile.
She has a very convincing reason to justify the crack it leaves in my honor. Apparently I slept with her, in the future. Shannon blinked, puzzled. Can you repeat that? I joined her 500 years from now, Talorcan said, and laughter burst from him, shaking his shoulders. And then I sent her back to this time, to save me. Shannon watched him with furrowed brows. And how does she claim to have reached the future?
She says it was by a spell, Talorcan replied, amused.
Now that she wasn't nearby, it was easier to laugh at the absurdity, easier to resist the fierce attraction threatening to break his will. Shannon stroked his beard thoughtfully, as if trying to unravel a web of invisible signs. So she claims you yourself woke her and sent her here?
Yes.
To keep me from being killed. She also murmured something about you and Caelan being in danger. Shannon squinted and rubbed the deep furrow between his brows with his index finger, an old gesture, as if every crease in his face stored decades of reasoning. Talorcan, you must keep an open mind. It's not entirely impossible, he murmured gravely. Talorcan shrugged, though the smile had already vanished. In theory, no, it's not.
But just listening to her words makes it clear she's a liar, with little grasp of the truth.
I admit her story is unlikely, but still. I won't repeat all the nonsense she said, Talorcan interrupted with restrained irritation. But to reassure you, her story has so many holes that if it were a ship, it would already be at the bottom of the sea. Shannon studied him carefully. I don't see what harm there would be in taking precautions. Maybe you should spend more time with her. Observe her. See what you can discover. I will. I plan to take her to Tir Naraith in the morning. Maybe someone will recognize her, or will learn something about her lineage. Shannon nodded slowly. I will observe her too. I'll study her mind, as I do the apprentices. He looked at him with druidic severity.
I saw how you looked at her.
And I know that despite your doubts, you desire her. But if she's as unbalanced as she seems, I won't allow that to cloud your judgment. You must keep her away from your bed. You have a promised wife. You have a duty to the Caer Thalanis bloodline. I know, Talorcan growled, and the slight humor in his voice vanished completely. We must preserve the line, rebuild the legacy, Shannon insisted softly. I know, Talorcan repeated, each word heavy with tension. Then you know where your duty lies, Shannon concluded, lowering his voice.
Not between that girl's thighs.
Talorcan let out a furious breath, and left the hall without responding. Shannon watched him go in silence. A story like hers was hard to believe. How could one accept that someone would come knocking, claiming to have lived with his son, in a time yet to come? And yet, the same mind that pushed him to dismiss such a possibility was also the one that, as a druid, knew he had to consider even the improbable. He had done the calculations. Although remote, the possibility existed. And a wise druid ignored no path of fate. If the girl's story was true, then Aeryn Morwyn must know Talorcan not only in flesh but in soul. If it was true she had entrusted him with her body, and then risked her life to return to him. How much did she really know about his son? He would talk to Neria. He would ask her to speak with Aeryn, to mention certain things casually and watch. Neria had a keen eye for character. And he would also spend time studying her, not through words which could be skillfully shaped, but by observing the structure of her mind, the subtle patterns of thought, as he did with the initiates. Together, he and Neria would find the truth. Talorcan, for his part, was not acting with the wisdom he expected of himself. 3 failed engagements had left him skeptical, wounded, stubbornly clinging to the idea of marrying almost blindly, like one fulfilling a penance. He allowed himself no distractions, not even when that distraction carried an aura of mystery that trembled the air. Shannon knew it, the lineage must be preserved. But he also sensed that a union with Miss MacRhean would only bring misfortune. A lifetime of resignation. A liar, that Aeryn Morwyn? He wasn't so sure. Chapter 20. Selyn Blaerwick bent with difficulty over the tapestry in front of the fire, her knobby fingers feeling the ancient rods of fate. A spasm of fear twisted in her belly like a coiled viper. Her soul, hardened by superstition and loss, couldn't breathe without its rituals. The runes, the tea leaves, the birch rods marked with druidic symbols were her breath. And lately, the dark omen swirling around her son was stealing her sleep like an unrelenting crow. When she and Nevin arrived in the lands of the Caer Thalanis clan, a thrill of joy had sent shivers down her spine. They were returning to the highlands, their true home, where cliffs rose through the mist, lakes slept among mountains like ancient watery eyes, and the air smelled of heather and eternity. Sacred land. Land of the ancestors. Land of gods who once whispered to the druids secrets only the heart could understand. Nevin, her only surviving son, had been named priest of the Caer Thalanis, a clan of ancient lineage and solid fortune. There, sheltered by his new position, he could escape the wars that had taken his brothers. She had believed at last that she had put him beyond the reach of shadows. But the shadows had returned. The first sign was faint, a dark figure at the edge of her daily reading. Then it came again and again, each day closer. Like a prophecy that doesn't fade, like thick fog that doesn't clear with the sun. The darkness settled not only over Nevin, but also, confirmed by the rods the last time, over one of Shannan's sons, the Caer Thalanis patriarch. But which one? And what hidden link threatened to intertwine their destinies? Selyn spent her afternoons whispering ancient prayers to gods without Christian names, tracing runes with trembling fingers while anguish gnawed at her bones. Her whole life had been a silent dialogue with fear. She wouldn't let darkness take Nevin too. Not again. She sighed, smoothing her hair with shaky hands, and threw the rods onto the table. If Nevin had caught her in the act, he would have lectured her again about the inscrutable designs of God, that absent God who never answered when she asked why he had taken 4 children and left only 1. But the rods were generous that night. For the second time in her life, a vision unfolded before her with the clarity of fire reflected on a dark lake. She saw Talorcan MacRhean, the eldest son, his face marked by worry, heard a woman sobbing, and saw her own son Nevin with blood on his lips. There was a 4th figure, blurred, like a foreign presence she couldn't focus on. A witness, perhaps. Or a spirit. The crying woman, she intuited, must be the same one who, according to the rods, would bring death to her son. Talorcan's future wife. But she was not the golden figure Selyn had seen before. This one was smaller, wrapped in mist. The vision faded like a sigh among ruins, leaving her exhausted and with a shrinking heart. She had to stop that marriage. She knew Talorcan was engaged, a 4th attempt they said at dawn, but her son Nevin stubbornly remained silent about the details of the castle and its occupants. The more she pressed, the more closed off he became. At first he spoke freely, now he barely mentioned anything beyond the details of the chapel restorations. The distance grew like a crack between them, and the silence was a prophecy in itself. The Blaerwick cabin lay in a remote valley, on the borders of Tir Naraith, 20 miles from the castle. Nevin made the journey on foot every day, but Selyn, with her stiff joints and tired body, could not keep up. On good days she managed to walk 5 miles, perhaps to the village, but not to the castle. Still, if the weather was kind and her bones didn't protest, she could make her way to Tir Neraith. Maybe there, among villagers' whispers, she would gather the missing pieces. Neven was all she had left. And neither the MacRheans nor the church nor even that distant god would take her last son away too. Chapter 21. Aeryn cautiously extended her hand, murmuring softly, "Here, horse, horse." The creature watched her, curling its lips to reveal teeth as large as they were intimidating. Aeryn quickly withdrew her hand. The animal flattened its ears and flicked its tail with an air of annoyance. It was imposing, majestic in its muscle, and inspired a respect that bordered on fear. Minutes earlier, Talorcan had brought 2 steeds out of the dark shadows of the stable, firmly tying them to a nearby post. Without looking at her, he had taken the larger one and walked away, leaving her alone before the other beast. Aeryn held her breath to walk with feigned calm toward the animal, and now she stood there by the wooden door, trying to soothe what she felt as a force of nature. She felt out of place. She had been born in the city, raised among stone streets and engine noise. How was she supposed to deal with half a ton of muscle covered in mane, with fangs and hooves? She tried again, now without affectation, just a low voice like the wind through leaves, but the beast, completely indifferent, simply lifted its tail and urinated without remorse, leaving a warm trail on the ground. Aeryn jumped back, wrinkling her nose in disdain. And to think she had started the day, believing it would be better than the night before. It had all begun with promises of relief, a steaming bath, the scent of soap on her skin, rest over the sore muscles of a newly loved body. Then the light mead brought to her room by a silent maid, and with the first sip, optimism returned. She dressed with renewed determination, seeking Talorcan to warn him of the danger stalking them. But as soon as she crossed the threshold of the great hall, he interrupted her with his verdict: they would go to the village. On horseback. Aeryn glanced sideways at the creature she was supposed to ride. She had never seen a horse up close. And now she had to trust her fragile body to that living mass of arrogance and strength. It resembled Talorcan, strong, confident, handsome, and equally intimidating. "Here, horse," she whispered again, extending her hand. The animal approached, sniffing gently. But just as its lips touched her fingers, Aeryn pictured those giant teeth closing on her hand and jerked back sharply. The horse snorted and flattened its ears again. Behind her, Talorcan watched with a mix of confusion and amusement. "Never seen a horse, girl," he said mockingly. "Shouting horse doesn't work. They don't know they are horses. It's like walking through the forest saying boar, boar, hoping it stops to greet you before you kill it for dinner." She turned to him, flushed and wounded in her pride. "Of course I've seen horses," she murmured. "In books. And don't be so arrogant. Remember your face the first time you saw a car?" "A car," he repeated incredulously. "In my time we have carriages that move without horses." Talorcan burst out laughing, dismissing her words with a disdainful gesture. "Then you've never ridden one," he stated dryly, and with a graceful, precise leap swung onto his mount with the ease of a warrior born of the wind. It was a movement full of innate elegance and serene strength. An irritatingly perfect spectacle. Conceited, Aeryn snapped at him. He smiled with that arrogance that seemed etched into his bones. "Doesn't sound like a compliment." "It's not. It means vain, showy, self-absorbed. Everyone does what they can with what they have," he said, his gaze lingering on her lips and shamelessly dropping to her breasts before looking away. "I saw you. Don't look at me like that." "You're promised," she reminded him stiffly, feeling she betrayed that ethne just by thinking it. "I'm not married yet," he replied, with a half-smile that darkened his eyes. "That's despicable." He shrugged, resigned. "That's how men are," he murmured. But it wasn't true. Inside, Talorcan held firmer principles than she knew. He didn't seek easy pleasure, he wanted respect, loyalty, and yet Aeryn unsettled him like no one else. He desired her. But he would resist. "I can walk," Aeryn said, raising her chin. "It's a whole day's journey, 20 stadia," he lied softly, turning his mount with studied indifference. She followed reluctantly, muttering under her breath. She knew exactly what a stadion was, 1/8 of a mile. If the village was 20 away, it wasn't even half a day's march.
But she didn't want to reveal her knowledge.
Talorcan stopped and looked at her with exhausted patience, offering one last chance. Aeryn shielded her eyes from the sun, and regarded him with disdain. He wore those leather trousers again that outlined his powerful legs, a linen shirt billowing like a war banner over his muscles. Dark hair fell over his shoulders like a wolf's mane, and then he shook it with that unconscious ancestral virile gesture. Her stomach clenched. She knew what was beneath that leather. She had felt it. Held it in her hands. She sighed and looked away, desperate to drown the memory. When he brought his mount closer, the horse stirred, backing up slightly. Talorcan smiled. So there are things that intimidate you, Aeryn Morwyn. Fear is one thing, ignorance another, she answered firmly. The first time you do something, there's always uncertainty. I have no experience with horses.
But that's still the key word. Let's see then, brave one, he said, offering his hand.
You won't ride that animal alone. Either you ride with me, or you walk. Behind me, he added playfully. She raised her hand, and he caught her wrist, lifting it easily over the saddle. Aeryn fell softly onto the mount, sitting in front of him, her body cradled by arms closing the reins.
Slowly, he whispered.
Perhaps to the horse. Perhaps to her. The heat of his body enveloped her. Her chest against his back, legs alongside his, arms around her with an almost ritual possession. Aeryn closed her eyes. If only he remembered her. If somewhere in his soul, among the shadows of memory jealously guarded by the druids, a trace remained of what they had lived in the stones. What if, in some forgotten corner of his being, he still knew who she was? Talorcan lay motionless behind her, his warm breath on her neck like an ancient whisper. Aeryn felt his closeness with an almost supernatural intensity. Neither he nor the horse seemed to be breathing. Only the pulse burning beneath her skin reminded her she was alive. She needed all her willpower not to turn and steal a kiss, one deep and overflowing, on the lips just a twist away. Aren't we moving forward, or are you trying to seduce me with style? She asked, her voice trembling slightly. If they stayed this close, skin against skin, she couldn't be responsible for her actions. A lock of Talorcan's dark hair had fallen over her shoulder, and she had to clench her fingers tightly to stop herself from reaching up to stroke it. What was he doing there, so near, so untouchable? Dreaming of him was foolish. Talorcan was younger than her by a month, but possessed the recklessness of a lifetime short on wisdom. He was only leading her to Tir Naraith to seek answers, not because of any deeper bond. What a fool! Yes, he answered in a rough voice, urging the horse forward with a slight movement of his legs. Aeryn held her breath, as the animal began to move. The jolt felt both dizzying and powerful, as if her whole being was swept away by a torrent. The horse's mane streamed in the wind as they rode through heather-covered meadows, its gallop echoing like a sound from another time. It was an almost mystical experience. In her mind she saw herself riding freely over the hills, as if the air itself embraced her. She had always wanted to learn to ride, but her rigid academic upbringing had not allowed it. In her family the Morwyns, thought was valued, not action. Perhaps this was a way to break from her past. She could become someone new, someone with roots in the earth and not just in reason. I'd like to learn to ride, she said softly, resting her face against his shoulder. If she was to stay a while, learning medieval skills wouldn't be foolish. She wouldn't tolerate always depending on others to get around. In her time when her car was being repaired, she felt like she couldn't breathe. Here freedom took the shape of horse and wind. Maybe the stable master can fit you into his schedule, Talorcan murmured near her ear, but I've heard he makes his apprentices clean the stalls. She shivered. Was that a deliberate brush of his lips, or just a consequence of the horse's trot? Maybe Caelan can teach me, she suggested lightly. I doubt Caelan will teach you anything at all, he growled darkly, and this time the brush against her ear was unmistakable. And I order you to keep your lips away from my brother, or I'll be forced to confine you to your chambers." What game was this? Was it jealousy burning beneath his deep tone, or just what she wanted to imagine? Besides, as long as you fear the horse, it will sense it. It won't respond well. Horses are sensitive creatures, intelligent, full of spirit. "Like me," she retorted cheekily. He let out a stifled grunt, half laugh, half warning. "No. Horses obey. You hardly. And you certainly have a high opinion of yourself. No more than you. I see fire in you, girl. But you don't let it out. And as long as you keep lying to me, there can be no respect between us. Why don't you tell the truth?" "I did," she replied, hurt. "And if you don't believe me, why don't you take me back through the stones?" The idea surprised her, as she said it. What if he accompanied her, for just one day into the future? She could show him her world, Caer's cities, the place where she had found him. Why hadn't she thought of it before? "No," he cut her off without hesitation. "The stones must not be used for personal reasons. It's forbidden." "Ha! You just admitted you know how to use them," she shot back quickly. He grunted near her ear, irritated. "And what else would you use them for? A secret mission?" "It wasn't personal reasons, you saved your clan." "That justifies it." "Stubborn girl. I won't continue this argument." "But stubborn. Enough words. And stop twisting like that." They rode the rest of the way in silence, each trapped in their thoughts, while the ancestral landscape of the highlands wrapped them in its eternal breath. Chapter 22. Caer Thalanis called itself a village, though in reality it was a prosperous town. To Talorcan, it was the most harmonious and precious place in the known world. Its inhabitants, wise and discreet, avoided speaking of it when traveling, thus preserving their sanctuary of peace in the highlands. The Caer Thalanis druids kept constant watch over Caer Thalanis, performing ancient rituals to ensure the fertility of the fields and the clan's prosperity. They had placed magical defenses, wards, around the crops to discourage curious outsiders from entering the lineage's domain. Caer Thalanis was more than a village. It was legacy. It was home. It had been founded centuries ago, when the first families settled in the fertile, hidden valley that the Caer Thalanis had protected. Over the years, hundreds became thousands. Far enough to keep unwanted visitors away, but not so far from the sea to deny trade, Caer Thalanis thrived. 4 churches, 2 mills, candlemakers, tanners, weavers, tailors, potters, blacksmiths, armorers, shoemakers, and a multitude of artisans kept its lifeblood alive. First they would go to the goldsmith's workshop, where Talorcan wanted to inspect the delicate gold leaf used to embellish one of Shannan's sacred tomes. As they approached the city gates, he watched her with as much indifference as he could muster, a difficult task with her trapped between his thighs. He had hesitated to put her on his horse, but there was no alternative. Aeryn didn't know how to ride. Still, he studied her carefully. She stretched to look in all directions, eager to learn. They passed by the tanneries and butcher shops, located on the outskirts, where the strongest smells could disperse more easily. Further inside, the smiths worked at their blazing forges, away from the more delicate merchants. The houses, made of solid stone with thatched roofs, had shutters open onto the streets. Along the main road stood candlemakers, weavers, and shoemakers. The upper windows, propped open with poles, formed makeshift awnings, while the lower ones displayed goods on tempting shelves. The town council, guided by Caer Thalanis' principles, strictly regulated trade, sanitation, and craftsmanship. Aeryn seemed amazed, as if she had never seen a town before. Since they passed through the gates, she had not stopped asking questions. The blacksmiths, with their fire, sparks, and glowing steel, had her mesmerized. She gaped at a young apprentice who, with tongs, stretched a glowing wire through a mold. Talorcan watched her without a word, feeling that this woman who did not belong to his time was beginning to root herself in his world. And that unsettled him more than any ancient magic. As they walked along the market path, a butcher nearly made her lose her composure. She flatly rejected his offer of a strip of salted venison. When they passed the tanner's stall, she saw steam rising from several shallow vats and asked him to stop. She wanted to watch as, with a double-handled tool, he shaved the hide from a piece of leather. It was a primitive scene, almost ritualistic, and Aeryn looked captivated. Talorcan narrowed his eyes. She was the most baffling creature he had ever encountered. Her apparent madness came in bursts, intense unpredictable flares. As long as she didn't speak of impossible futures or make absurd claims about him, she merely seemed eccentric, not insane. When she leaned down and placed a hand on his leather-clad thigh, every muscle in his body tensed like a drawn bow. His leg went rigid beneath the light touch of that palm. He shut his eyes with effort, telling himself it was just a hand, nothing more, merely an extension of the human body, with no real reason to ignite that wave of reckless desire. But ever since he had lifted her onto his horse, her small warm body curved between his thighs, he had wanted her with an intensity that refused to fade. Her closeness clouded his thoughts, hardened his flesh, reduced him to a primal impulse. His ancestors in times of conquest had taken what they wanted unapologetically, without restraint, with the certainty of those who believe they have a right to what they desire. For a fleeting moment, he thought he had that right. And that she wouldn't protest. Not much, at least. "Did he make your trousers?" Aeryn asked, nodding toward the tanner. "Yes," Talorcan replied curtly, brushing her hand away with a sharp motion.
"Sorry for touching your glorious character," she replied stiffly, feigning indignation. "It was just curiosity."
"I was wondering if your trousers are as soft as they look." He pressed his lips together to keep from smiling.
"Glorious character," he repeated to himself.
Where did she get these expressions? "My trousers may be soft, girl," he thought darkly, "but what's beneath them is not." If her hand had gone a little higher. "Can I have a pair of leather trousers?" he repeated, scandalized. She tilted her head, her lips a whisper away from his. Talorcan's heart pounded violently, and he forced himself to stay still, afraid that one movement would make him taste those lying lips that tempted him with fire. "They look comfortable, Talorcan. I'm not good with formal dresses." Her words spilled from her lips like a spell. He barely heard them. All he saw was the hypnotic movement of that mouth, promising more than her tongue dared say. His thoughts betrayed him. He pictured her wearing nothing but those tight trousers, her hair loose like a golden storm, and nothing else. He shook his head, irritated with himself. "No," he growled, spurring the horse. She huffed.
"Can't even look at you now?"
She kept grumbling all the way to the silversmith's tent, though he noticed she never took her eyes off him, her delicious lower lip caught between her teeth, making him shift with discomfort. When they finally dismounted, Talorcan, eager to put distance between them, went to knock on the door, but she cleared her throat with calculated sweetness. "You're leaving me up here?" She looked helpless, draped in her mother's lavender cloak, her hair loose like a whisper of light. Talorcan sighed. He didn't want to touch her. He knew that if he did, he wouldn't be able to let go. But he couldn't risk her getting hurt. Caelan would kill him if he found out. She threw herself into his arms before he could react, forcing him to hold her tightly. The scent of her hair, lavender and old memories, wrapped around him like a spell. Her breasts soft and full pressed against his chest, and her legs unashamed locked around his waist. By the gods, no wonder Caelan hadn't resisted. "Talorcan," she whispered, and her warm breath shattered him. He kissed her. Without restraint, without measure, as if the act itself could erase others' kisses and brand her with his own name. It was a kiss violent and true, burning and hungry. She responded as if she'd waited her whole life, her hands tangled in his hair, her body melted against his, her desires raw as his own. There was no innocence in that touch. It was an ancient dance, as if their bodies remembered something their minds hadn't yet grasped. A sudden image flashed through him, Aeryn in strange clothes, looking at him through a mirror that didn't belong to his world. He struggling to wear odd faded trousers, modern ones. What sorcery was this? And then a voice. "My lord," someone said, alarmed. Talorcan closed his eyes, summoning druidic discipline. He couldn't lose himself like this. Not now. But the witch, as if she knew, bit his lower lip as she pulled away, stoking his desire even more. Deeply irritated with himself, he turned to the silversmith, grateful for the interruption. Old Thomas was watching them with an indulgent smile. "So this is the future Lady MacRhean," he said. Talorcan didn't correct him. The less said about that, the better. "Never seen Talorcan kiss anyone in the street," the old man murmured, still stunned. "Must be love." Aeryn looked at him from the corner of her eye, and her smile set him ablaze again. He let her inside and stayed out a moment longer, breathing in the cold afternoon air.
"Love," he thought bitterly.
"I'm bewitched." Chapter 23. Aeryn was wrapped in a feverish kind of bliss. He had kissed her. He had kissed her with the same tenderness and certainty as he had in her own time, and for one fleeting moment, she had seen the true Talorcan reflected in his eyes, as if the veil of time had been torn. Even the old blacksmith had noticed. He had murmured that it looked like there was love between them. That fleeting spark rekindled hope in her chest. In her century, Talorcan had once confessed that he would never kiss another if he were engaged or married. Well then, she thought with a flicker of joy, he had just broken that rule. Perhaps if she could dig deep enough into his memory, if she could awaken gestures, words, or fragments from the other time, he might eventually remember everything. And then she clung to the dream, she would save him. He would break his vow and marry her. As these thoughts cradled her in a half-waking reverie, she let her gaze wander around Thomas's cabin, resisting the childish urge to fan herself like an infatuated maiden. Talorcan was outside, busy with the horse, or perhaps simply keeping his distance. In both centuries he reacted the same way when passion was lit, and Aeryn knew well he was a man of contained fire. Once he started, he didn't like to stop. With mischievous affection, she hoped that the uncomfortable leather trousers he had refused to buy her were equally unbearable for him. Still, she let those thoughts drift away and allowed herself to take in the place's peculiar beauty. Though small and simple, the cabin felt warm, almost sacred. A faint floral scent lingered in the air, probably from the herbs hanging in inverted bundles over the windows. Finely worked silver filled the room, chalices, plates, reliquaries, intricately braided gold paternosters, and religious scenes laid out with reverent order on shelves and tables. An illuminated manuscript, spread open across a long table, rested between carefully arranged candles. Noticing her curiosity, Thomas explained that he avoided oil lamps since the smoke damaged metals and texts. He only burned certain types of wood, chosen with meticulous devotion to keep soot to a minimum. His craft wasn't just a trade, it was an act of loyalty and love for Laird MacRhean. In fact, Shannon had paid for costly glass windows just so natural light could better illuminate his work. "This manuscript is for Shannon," he said, pointing out the open volume with enthusiasm. Aeryn lifted it, with the reverence of someone holding a lost legacy. The pages were written in an arcane language, adorned with symbols that danced just beyond comprehension, and the borders, delicately gilded with Celtic knots, whispered stories from another time.
"What is this book about?" she asked in awe.
Thomas shrugged. "No idea. Shannon collects volumes in languages no one understands." That was when Talorcan burst into the cabin like a highland gust, carrying the scent of heather on his clothes and an impatient scowl. "Are you done with that?" he asked, eager to retrieve the book and resume his search. "Not yet. It'll take a few more days," Thomas replied, handing him another volume he held like a newly discovered treasure. But Aeryn, recognizing what he had in his hands, took it with trembling fingers. Her voice was a sacred whisper. "Dear God." She was holding a copy of Ptolemy's Almagest, the geocentric vision of the universe that wouldn't see modern publication until the 16th century. And here it was in her hands. It was all she could do not to hug the book like a beloved friend. "I'll take that," Talorcan said, snatching it away with the urgency of someone who didn't yet grasp the sacredness of what he held. Aeryn didn't even protest. She was still stunned, knowing she had just touched an unbroken piece of time. Talorcan turned to Thomas. "I'll be back in 2 weeks for the other volume." And without another word, he urged her to follow. Aeryn obeyed, but her mind was already wandering down other paths. The volume, the passion for the stars. Talorcan, a cosmologist of the 16th century. She smiled bitterly. She, who had abandoned physics out of spite, had ended up falling for a man who studied the heavens, the planets, and the numbers. A man with his mind in the universe, and his feet on the sacred earth of his ancestors. Only one thing was missing: he needed to start trusting her. Because between them, many truths were still waiting to be revealed. Chapter 24. As she crossed the threshold of the Great Hall, Aeryn let out a sigh as thick as fog. The day had begun with hope, only to dissolve into the shadows of bitter disappointment. Talorcan had been polite, even kind, but distant, as if the words she spoke reached him through a veil. To him she was no more than a curious figure, a fleeting distraction with strange ideas about an improbable future. 3 times he had corrected her with soft but firm words, dismissing her warnings as poor judgment or delusion. And the more she insisted on the story of the time to come, the more he seemed to see in her eyes a glimmer of madness. Even so, Talorcan had taken her through the village, presenting her like a trophy or a duty, greeting merchants, making her ride beside him. But he never touched her more than necessary. No look of desire, no gesture hinting at the passion she had seen in his reflection from the future. It was as if what they had shared had never happened. Still, Aeryn tried to focus on what she did have: the journey to the past with its earthy scents, stone alleys, and rustic yet warm people. She watched the purple heather fields stretch beneath the twilight sky like a sea held still. A pine marten peeked through the grass, an owl hooted in the distance, and night fell with a whisper, wrapping around them as they passed through the castle gates. "Don't they ever close these gates?" she asked, frowning. The Barbican, imposing and unguarded, seemed to trust peace too easily. Talorcan laughed, confident, proud. "House Caer Thalanis fears no one. There are no enemies here, only mountains and loyalty." "You should fear," she murmured. "Danger can wear a familiar face." He looked at her with a spark of irony. "Right now, the only visible threat is riding my horse." "I'm not threatening you," Aeryn replied wearily. "I'm just asking you to consider what I said about the skunks. And no one recognized me in the village. Doesn't that tell you something?" Talorcan unsheathed his sword, and held it before her, contemplative. "A skunk," he repeated, puzzled by her metaphor. She sighed. "I meant that if something looks like something and acts like it, it probably is. You just need to look past your prejudice." He didn't answer. She went on. "It doesn't matter, if you believe me. Just promise me 2 things." "I can't promise you my hand. It's already given," he said sharply. She looked away, hurt. "Then just don't let Caelan go to the meeting with MacRhean." "Too late. He left at dawn," he replied coldly. Aeryn paled. "You have to go after him. You don't know what could happen." "I sent 200 of my best men with him. It will be nothing more than a matter of honor between clans. Nothing serious." She wasn't so sure. Fate had already begun to shift. She remembered that in her time, Caelan had gone with barely a dozen men. Something had altered the course of events. "Did you tell him what I said?" "Yes. Not because I believe you, but because I can't gamble with my brother's life. We'll see if that battle you spoke of actually happens. And if it does, will you believe me then?" Talorcan said nothing. His face closed like a fortress. "Go to your chambers. I'll have a bath and some food sent up." Aeryn looked at him with dry irony. "You don't think I started a war just to prove my point, do you?" The warrior looked her over, from her tousled hair to her dusty slippers. "When I look at you, I don't know what to believe. And right now, I'm damn tired of looking at you." She gave a bitter smile. "I suppose that means I won't be getting a goodnight kiss." He tensed, caught between passion and duty. "I'm a betrothed man," he said stiffly.
Then don't kiss me like you did today, she shot back, calm and lethal.
You can't hide behind a promise when you're not yet married. You said you'd never kiss another if you were engaged. But you did. Because you wanted to. I only did it because you threw yourself at me, he protested. You kissed me because you wanted to, she replied, then turned and climbed the stairs. Talorcan watched her go, his mouth dry, his soul tangled. He wanted to kiss her again. Once. 1,000 times. Until she trembled and begged for his surrender. If she was inexperienced in love, he would be the one to teach her everything. No, he didn't believe he could ever grow tired of looking at Aeryn Morwyn. Chapter 25. She had made a decision. She was going to seduce him. Not as a frivolous ploy, but as a silent offering, an ancestral spell that might return to him the soul that seemed splintered. Yesterday's kiss had revealed a spark. She had glimpsed a flash of that other Talorcan, the man she remembered, hidden beneath the armor of the stranger now walking among castles and vows. Maybe, she thought, if she could touch his essence with tenderness, kiss by kiss, caress by caress, he might find his way back to himself. She liked to imagine it that way, each touch of hers a druidic charm that, upon meeting flesh, would awaken memories sleeping in the folds of time.
What about his promise?
Whispered her conscience, an echo in the voice of guilt. All is fair in love and war, her heart answered defiant. I'm sorry, Ethne, she added in a silent sigh, evoking with regret that unknown fiancé. I'm not one to steal men, but I love him. And I won't give up without a fight. She looked at herself in the mirror with a mixture of shame and resolve. The dress, a deep indigo that made her eyes shine like sapphires under the moon, flowed over her body like enchanted water. She smoothed the silk with her hands, studying her reflection with both critical and dreamy eyes. From the bottom of her oversized bag, a reliquary from another world where unnamed artifacts from her era still slept, she pulled what little remained of her civilization: no lipstick, no toothbrush, no clean underwear. But at least she had her soft skin, her thick lashes, and that trembling will of a woman who had discovered herself beautiful in a world where beauty could also be power. She twirled in place. Her curves suggested themselves beneath the fabric like hills in the mist. She felt strangely feminine. A feeling far removed from what she knew in her lab coat. The dress hugged her waist, framed her silhouette, and touched her chest with the reverence of an altar. Talorcan had loved her breasts, she remembered that clearly. And tonight she would make sure he saw them. No words, no scandal, only the eloquence of the obvious. It didn't matter how firm his commitment to another might be. The desire was still there. It hadn't faded. And that was all she needed. With a swift motion, she leaned forward and adjusted the neckline of the dress, gently lifting each breast and settling them into the bodice like crowns. She straightened, and looked at herself in the mirror again. For a moment, she felt shame.
But she reminded herself, you work with what you have.
He himself had said it the day before, with a smile that still burned in her memory. Chapter 26. Good morning, Shannon. Where's Talorcan? Aeryn asked softly, slipping onto the long bench beside him in the great hall. Shannon didn't look up. His nose remained buried in a thick leather-bound volume, as he calmly chewed a mouthful of steaming oats. Only after swallowing did he grunt, without emotion. I'll be with you in a moment, my lady. Aeryn waited patiently. She understood the spell of books, and how rude it could be to break that enchantment. To distract herself, she lifted her gaze to the balustrade on the upper floor, admiring its elegant lines, then let her eyes drift over the tapestries hanging on the walls like fragments of living history. Caer Thalanis' castle carried the weight of centuries, and the grace of the eternal. It was a jewel of stone and wood, and though it lacked modern comforts, it held a deep harmony that surpassed any contemporary artifice. The carved cherrywood tables, towering wardrobes, solid beds, and wrought iron chandeliers spoke of an era when beauty was shaped by human hands, not machines. Every corner breathed heritage, as if the ghosts of former lords still whispered between the walls. And yet it wasn't a cold place. There was warmth in the hand-woven cushions, in the bundles of aromatic herbs tied with linen string, in the wool rugs, and in the bustle of the maids flitting through the halls like bees in a sacred hive. It was a living home. No electricity, no plumbing, true, but it had a presence that made it more human. Aeryn sighed. With enough fireplaces, and a big, warm Highlander in the bed, winter was survivable, she thought wryly. The smell of breakfast arrived before the maid did. Nerya appeared with a resolute air, laying out a feast on the table: butter-fried eggs, strips of lard, fruit drenched in cream, and oatcakes with honey. Aeryn's stomach gave a groan of surrender. "Put that book down, Shannon," Nerya scolded, with easy familiarity.
"You've got a guest at the table."
Aeryn stifled a smile. Talorcan hadn't lied. There was a bond between the old man and his housekeeper as old as the walls around them, built on trust without titles or ceremony. Nerya treated him like a man, not a laird. "Any nettle tea left this morning?" Aeryn asked hopefully. Shannon finally looked up. His eyes, tired but sharp, landed on her, dropped to her neckline, and with hawk-like speed, one white eyebrow arched in suspicion. He blinked several times, surprised. "Of course," Nerya replied, stepping behind Aeryn, and placing a napkin on her shoulder with motherly tenderness. "Shannon, get your eyes off the girl's chest," Nerya murmured without anger. Aeryn flushed. Instinctively, she brought a hand to her neckline, trying to cover up, and focused on the decorated plates, the heavy silverware, and the pewter goblets.
"She's the one who pushed them up," Shannon protested with wounded dignity. "I didn't want to look, but they were just there. Like trying not to see the sun in the sky."
"I doubt she did it for you," Nerya replied, casting a meaningful glance at Aeryn. Aeryn shook her head, mortified. As Nerya refilled the old man's pitcher, her own neckline slipped open for a moment. Shannon, hardly disguising it, became transfixed by the sight. Aeryn nearly laughed, but her amusement caught in her throat when she saw the change in the man's eyes. It was no longer a fleeting or playful glance. There was something deeper in him now, a blend of pure desire and reverent tenderness. He wasn't looking at a young woman's body with lust, he was seeing the woman herself, whole in her maturity, with gratitude and longing. A weight of melancholy settled on Aeryn. She didn't fully understand it, but something in that gaze moved her. Shannon loved Nerya. Not in a frivolous or timid way, he loved her with the kind of love born of years, of shared memories, understood silences, and a loyalty that needed no words. When Nerya left, Aeryn stole a quick glance at Shannon. He must have felt it, because he jolted slightly, like waking from a dream. "I wasn't looking at her chest," he muttered awkwardly. "Don't lie to me. And if you don't make jokes about my charms, I won't say anything about yours, for Nerya. What you feel for her?" Shannon huffed. "What I feel for? Fine. Deal." They sank into the silent enjoyment of breakfast. Aeryn wondered why food tasted so different in the 16th century. Was it the lack of chemicals? The peat smoke flavor in the meat? The untreated milk? While she wrestled with a piece of ham, Shannon suddenly asked, his voice tight. "Do you play chess, my lady?" Aeryn looked up, surprised by the abrupt change. She smiled gently. "Of course. Would you like a game?" "On the terrace. In 2 hours, if you wish." Aeryn brightened. Talorcan's father wanted to spend time with her. She couldn't remember her own father ever doing such a thing. She pressed that memory down into the depths of her soul. She looked at Shannon in a new light. Maybe if he knew her story, if Talorcan had told him, he could be an ally. Maybe he would actually listen. And as the sun climbed the stone walls and the castle bells marked the hour, Aeryn knew that today they wouldn't just play a game of chess. Something else would begin, the delicate art of winning a clan's heart through truth, honor, and patience. Chapter 27. Aeryn peeked into the kitchen, caught between shyness and resolve. The hearth crackled under the weight of the cauldrons, and the air was fragrant with yeast and thyme. She paused at the threshold, hesitant. "I don't usually show this much skin, Nerya," she said softly, as if apologizing to the hunched back of the woman kneading dough by the fire.
But what she really sought was more than forgiveness.
She was reaching for a connection. Aeryn knew that Nerya the MacRhean's housekeeper was more than just a cook. She was the soul of the castle, its eyes and ears, its silent guardian. If anyone knew the shadows surrounding Talorcan, it would be her. And Aeryn didn't want to earn her disapproval. "I don't think you do it out of vanity, girl," Nerya replied without turning, warmth in her voice. "Despite what you show, you have a clean heart. Women often believe they have no choice, but that's rarely true. You might have more paths ahead than you imagine." Aeryn stepped inside, intrigued.
"What kind of paths?"
Nerya pulled her hands from the dough and looked at her with dark eyes, tired but alive. "Can you bake?"
"Not really, but I'd give it a try," Aeryn replied, a bit puzzled.
Was she being offered a job in the kitchen? The image of herself serving Talorcan and his future bride made her stomach turn.
"You have good hands."
"Wash them. You can help me with the bread." Aeryn obeyed, and soon her fingers were buried in a warm mound of dough. There was something surprisingly therapeutic about it, like molding soft dreams in the hope they'd take shape. "Do you want to talk about what happened the night you arrived?" Nerya asked gently, as she skewed a piece of lamb on an iron spit. Aeryn stayed silent. The warmth of the kitchen, and the feel of flour on her hands gave her a sense of home she hadn't known in a long time. "How long have you lived here?" 12 years, she answered with pride, hanging the meat over the fire. Aeryn took a deep breath and dared to ask, "Have you ever noticed anything unusual about Talorcan? Or the MacRheans?" Nerya paused. A shadow passed through her expression as she wiped her hands. "You mean their magic?" Aeryn swallowed. That word, spoken so casually by Nerya, fit perfectly into the puzzle she had struggled to piece together. "Yes. Like that voice he can use?" Nerya turned to her with genuine curiosity. "You heard it? That voice that sounds like many voices at once?" Aeryn nodded. "Once. He ordered me to leave him alone. It was unsettling. They don't use it lightly. They prefer protection spells or healing. They're druids, Aeryn. Of the oldest bloodline. Servants of the Tir Naraith." Aeryn's heart skipped a beat. Druids. Not as myths but as real men, heirs to the ancient knowledge, alchemy, astronomy, sacred geometry. She, a scientist from another century, now stood in a world where science blurred into legend. "I thought druids disappeared centuries ago."
"That's what they want the world to believe."
"But the MacRheans still nourish the land, keep the paths safe, heal the creatures hurt by storms. If great danger threatened the earth, they say gifts would awaken in them that no one's ever dreamed of." Aeryn fell silent. Was that what Talorcan was? A sleeping guardian? "And even knowing he's a druid, you still care for him?" Nerya asked shrewdly. Aeryn didn't hesitate, as she nodded. Nerya sighed. She wiped her hands and placed them on her hips. "Talorcan's been betrothed 3 times. And 3 times he's been left before the vows. Did you know that?" Aeryn's heart trembled. "Is this his 4th engagement?"
"Yes. But not because he's unworthy."
"Women fear him. This time will be different. He's planned it more carefully. The wedding will follow Christian rites, and the bride will only stay here 2 weeks. He thinks he can hide his nature until after the vows. But even then, she might come to despise him." A flicker of hope flared in Aeryn's chest.
"Does he even know her?" "He's never seen her."
The match was arranged through envoys. Aeryn let out a breath of relief. He hadn't chosen this woman out of love. He didn't love her. "Och, it's clear what you feel for him," Nerya said with a wistful smile. Aeryn, her mischief sparked, countered. "And what about you and Shannon?" Nerya's expression closed off instantly. "Nothing. That old cautious badger and I are nothing. He watches you when you don't think he is." Nerya lowered her gaze. When she looked up again, her eyes were full of old scars. Don't say such things. I once loved a laird. It cost me my children. Nearly my life. In a quiet voice, she shared her tragedy, a forbidden love, 2 children born in secret, and a deceived wife who upon losing her husband condemned her to exile and stole her little ones. Shanaan had saved her from death, had held her like a fierce and gentle angel but never asked questions. Never.
He didn't try to help you get your children back? What could he have offered them?
I never told him everything. And he in his silence never asked. Aeryn felt something break inside her, aching with compassion. Sometimes silence is the cruelest punishment.
What if I fall in love with Talorcan? She whispered.
Nerya looked at her for a long moment before answering, her voice sweet with sorrow.
Then do it right, girl.
Love him with your soul. And if you're to give him a child, do it with joy. Maybe Caer Thalanis needs a child's laughter again to shatter its silence. Chapter 28. On a board of shadows and sun. Aeryn never felt entirely at ease under Shanaan's gaze. There was something about him, his way of being present without a sound, that unsettled her. Sometimes she wondered if his attention ever lingered even briefly, where the bodice of her dress began to reveal more than it should. She thought as she stitched a new design for herself, that perhaps she should lower the neckline a little further, just enough to unnerve herself, and maybe test his nerves too. That day the terrace offered a pause suspended in time. The old oaks creaked overhead, and a patch of sunlight warmed the ebony table where Shanaan was arranging an ancient chess set. Aeryn sat across from him, her eyes gleaming with delight. "It's beautiful here," she murmured, as a golden butterfly fluttered between them, landing for just a second before disappearing again into the thick afternoon air. "Our mountain is the jewel of dawn," Shanaan replied with pride, setting the pieces in place. The board, of ivory and ebony, carved with Celtic knots that seemed to whisper secrets of the ancient world, was a reliquary of forgotten memories. The pieces, kilted warriors riding rearing steeds, bishops with wise beards, towers as solemn men, and kings rising majestic above the rest. All of it spoke of a lost art, of a time when magic and nobility were the same blood. Aeryn, thoughtful, turned the board. Shanaan watched her with a flicker of suspicion. "I don't like opening the game," she explained. "I prefer to measure the enemy first." The first game was hers. The second, Shanaan's. For the third she proposed a variation, progressive chess. In it pawns gained power with each rank they crossed, like warriors maturing with every step toward destiny. When she defeated him with 2 queens, 3 knights and a bishop, he clapped loudly, delighted. "And to think Talorcan believes you're not clever," he said with a crooked smile. She frowned. "He said that?" she asked, hurt. "It doesn't matter," he added quickly. "Tell me, Shanaan, is there anyone who wants to harm your clan?" "No one," he answered with ancient calm. "The Caer Thalanis have no enemies. Here time drags on in peace." "Not even the king?" "James and I are fond of each other. When he was a child, I did a few magic tricks for him in Edinburgh. There's no war between us." "And Talorcan? Could he have wounded the pride of a jealous husband?" "Talorcan doesn't tangle with married women," he said dryly. "Nor with virgins." He watched her, amused, as she smiled in satisfaction at that revealing fragment. "Can I tell you my whole story?" "No. Words are air, Aeryn. Actions are what reveal the truth. But you've won a good battle on this board, and that says more than your tales." She looked at him intensely. "You don't know how much I needed to hear that." He raised a silver brow. "Until I found his son, I didn't even know I had a heart. But now I do. And that feather-brained lad plans to marry a woman he's never seen. She'll never be as right for him as I am." "Feather-brained," he laughed tenderly. "But you said you didn't want him forced." "I don't want him to do it out of duty. I want him to want it. He and I are perfect. He just doesn't remember. And if my story is true, maybe he's waiting for his grandson." Shanann's laugh echoed across the terrace, loud enough that Nerya peeked out curiously from inside. "You're bold, sharp and shameless," he said at last. "Yes, Aeryn Morwyn, I'll nudge fate a bit in your favor." She smiled, brushing her fringe aside. "One more game." Nerya appeared with 2 mugs of hot ale. Shanann invited her to join, and Aeryn patted the seat beside her. In the hours that followed, she observed the delicate ritual between the older pair, a silent balance, a dance of avoided glances. When one looked up, the other looked away. Their eyes never met directly. But it was obvious, they loved each other. And they didn't know it. As the sun dipped in strokes of liquid gold, Nerya stood to prepare supper. "Don't forget to dress up," she said with a wink. "I made his favorite tonight, roast pork, poached eggs and rutabagas. He never misses a meal." Aeryn nodded. Oh yes. She would dress. But Talorcan didn't make it to dinner that night. In fact, the stubborn man managed to avoid her for nearly a week. Chapter 29. Chaos. Talorcan thought grimly, had seized his castle not with weapons or fire but wrapped in gauzy silks, low-cut dresses and springtime laughter. As he gathered his dark mane and tied it back with a strip of leather, he realized that none of his defenses, strength, discipline, reason, were effective against that girl. Unless he declared open war, with guards and catapults, he would be defeated. And in that case, his father Nerya would mock him until breathless. Since bringing her to Tir Naraith, he had avoided touching her, because he knew, with a certainty as deep as it was old, that if he did so again he wouldn't be able to stop. And then there'd be no turning back. He forced himself to take a deep breath, hands clenched at his sides, and repeated the only viable strategy: avoid her until Caelan returned with Ethne. Once it was confirmed that the battle they feared was not approaching, he'd send her far away. Very far. But how far is far enough? Whispered that inner voice that never silenced. The same one that day after day whispered he had the right to take her in his arms, to make her his. A voice growing ever more dangerous, ever more seductive. He closed his eyes with a groan. For a moment he enjoyed the fleeting comfort of silence, until her laughter, like a dance of water and wind, floated in through the open window. Dreading and longing at once, he cracked his eyes open and searched for her. What color would she be wearing today? Indigo, lavender, deep violet? It was as if she knew his weakness for those shades and wore them on purpose. That morning she wore a mauve dress cinched with a golden ribbon. Her braided hair, pinned with purple clips, spilled in a golden chaos across her rosy cheeks. She walked through the meadows as if they'd always been hers, and somehow they were. For days, she had chased him through the entire castle, forcing him to hide in forgotten corners of the fortress. She didn't disguise her intentions. The moment she saw him, she'd pounce, disarming him with childish excuses and eyes that were far too sincere. But the night before, she had crossed a line. She had forced the lock on his door, and only because Talorcan had barricaded it with a wardrobe, had she not found him in bed. Instead, she'd opened the hallway door, and seeing him trapped, he had escaped through the window. He'd landed face first in a thorn bush, half naked, cursing the damage done to his most noble parts. He was convinced the woman would castrate him before their wedding night ever came. Her presence tainted everything. Even the bread on the table tasted like her. Nerya was experimenting with new recipes, clearly influenced by the newcomer. The girl was learning to ride, likely flirting with the stable boy, and in the afternoons paraded past him on a gentle mare, halting mid-step with a wild smile. He had to admit it, she was already riding well, and he had no doubt that soon she would follow him to the ends of the earth if he tried to flee. Before her arrival, his life had been a quiet, ordered river with clear goals, honor, duty, heirs. Ethne, the fiancée his brother would bring, seemed suitable for establishing a respectable lineage. But now he dreamed of the intruder. That same morning, as he changed in his chamber, he heard the sound of water in her bath. He paced restlessly from the stone hearth to the window, trying not to think about submerged flesh, hair like threads of gold floating beneath the foam. She was driving him mad. The night before, after his undignified fall, he had slept in the stables. Not long after he saw her coming down the stairs, wrapped in nothing but a sheer robe. "Talorcan, you can't keep avoiding me," she said softly. And he had fled. Without a word. Without daring even to look at her. The Laird of Tir Naraith, hiding in the stables by the old gods. Because he knew that if he stayed he would strip her of that robe, kiss her and devour every inch of her skin. His father and Neria weren't helping either. They treated the girl like the daughter they never had. Neria dressed her with care, Shanaan played chess with her on the terrace, and Talorcan had no doubt that once Caelan returned he too would try to court her. And Talorcan would have no right to protest. He was betrothed. He wasn't free. He slammed a fist against the stone parapet. 1 week. He only had to endure 1 more week. Once Caelan confirmed there was no war, he would send the girl to Edinburgh. Or farther. Maybe England. He would do whatever was necessary to keep his brother busy, while she vanished from his life. With determined steps, he stormed out of his chamber like a thundercloud, mentally counting the days left until his freedom.
But when he reached the service stairs he stopped.
By all the gods, he would not sneak out the back door again like a thief. If she was bold enough to provoke him in his current state, then she could face the consequences. Chapter 30. Talorcan turned a corner in the corridor at a brisk pace, and collided head-on with the young priest. Nevan, startled, fell backward with a gasp. "My lord," he exclaimed, as Talorcan caught him firmly by the elbows and helped him regain his balance. "My apologies," said the laird, releasing him once he saw he was steady. Nevan smoothed his tunic with nervous hands, blinking. "No, it was my fault. I was distracted, lost in thought. But I'm grateful for this encounter. I was looking for you. If you have a moment, there's something I'd like to discuss." Talorcan felt a fleeting flash of impatience. He stifled it at once, annoyed with himself. Since when did Nevan's visits unsettle him? They had shared many hours of meaningful conversation, and he had always held the young man in high regard. He drew a deep breath, calmed himself, and offered a restrained smile. "Is there a problem with the chapel?" he asked, feigning patience. "No, nothing serious. We just need to replace a few stones on the altar, and polish the new floor. It'll be ready in time."
"But what I wish to discuss is something else."
The priest hesitated, as if the matter he was about to bring up weighed more than it seemed. Talorcan frowned. Had he seen the girl chasing him? Was it a complaint about his engagement to Ethne? "It's my mother again," Nevan sighed, lowering his gaze. Talorcan exhaled and relaxed his shoulders. "Just Selen. She's been agitated lately, muttering about a danger she claims is looming over us." "Another of her visions?" Talorcan asked dryly, weary of dark prophecies.
"Yes," Nevan replied, a shadow of sorrow in his eyes.
"I remember she told Shanaan 2 weeks ago that my brother and I were wrapped in a cloak of shadows, or something like that. What is she afraid of now? The strangest part is that she believes your betrothed will harm me." Talorcan let out a short laugh. "Ethne? She's barely 15. And from what I've heard, she's as gentle as they come."
"It makes no sense, I know.
But my mother is no longer well. If you find her wandering and behaving like a madwoman, I ask that you be patient. Her condition worsens by the day. I doubt she'll make it to the castle on her own, but if she does, I understand. I'll inform my father and Caelan. If she appears, we'll see her home safely." "Thank you, my lord." As Talorcan resumed his path down the corridor, he paused for a moment and glanced back at the young priest. He had always been intrigued by his serenity, that unusual blend of Christian faith and tolerance for the old ways. How did he reconcile his vocation with a mother who read runes and foretold destinies? Have her visions ever come true? Talorcan asked, curious. Nevan smiled calmly. If there's truth in her readings, it's only because God has chosen to speak through them. Don't you think paganism and Christian faith are irreconcilable? Nevan took a moment before replying.
That's the common belief, but I don't share it.
I'm not offended by her reading of symbols. What troubles me is her attempt to change what she sees. The will of God will be fulfilled, whether she wants it or not. Then was she right or not? Talorcan pressed, intrigued. If someone is to harm me, it will be by the Father's will. I won't stand in the way. And if it's me? In other words, you won't tell me. Nevin's eyes gleamed with a spark of humor. The Lord God does not lay out cruel fates for his creatures. He gives us opportunities. It all depends on how we see them. My mother has a fearful mind. She sees shadows where there may be light. My advice: keep your heart whole, and if gifts born of love are offered to you, do not turn them away. In them you may find grace.
What kind of gifts?
Nevin gave one of his serene smiles, with that clear gaze that seemed to see beyond the visible. Still unsettled, Talorcan continued down the hallways toward the great hall, with the echo of those words resonating deep within his spirit. Aeryn had taken refuge in the foyer like a wandering soul, and at the sound of his footsteps descending, she sank heavily into a chair, her heart pounding in her chest. Seeing him approach without averting his gaze or seeking a way out, she nearly sprang to her feet, overcome by a mix of awe and fear. Her first impulse was to rush to him, cling to his leg like a desperate child and hold on to his warmth, refusing to let him leave her behind.
But she didn't.
Not in the face of that somber expression etched on his face, as if her very presence annoyed him. Fear held her back. She chose another path. So does this mean you've finally decided to listen to me, you stubborn, primitive Highlander? She asked with a forced smile, trying to mask her plea with irony. He walked past her as if he hadn't heard. Talorcan.
What? He snapped, turning to her with a steely glare.
Can't you leave me alone? My life was good, perfect until you showed up. With your seductive walk, your lips ready to tempt, set on dragging me to ruin. Tempt you me? She cut in, indignant. Aren't you the one strutting around shirtless half the time? If anyone's parading around here, it's you. For a moment his eyes sparkled with a flicker of humor that quickly faded. Almost absently, Talorcan adjusted the sporran and let the tartan drift a bit higher on his hip. He tossed back his dark mane and raised an eyebrow with ancestral arrogance. Aeryn's body reacted instantly with a heat that seemed to rise from the earth itself. She leaned toward him, letting the edge of her corset brush against her breasts, challenging him with her gaze. Two could play this game. And she was willing. Talorcan's eyes, stormy and blue as mist, shifted. They darkened, ignited with a repressed desire that throbbed between them like a storm on the verge of breaking. Aeryn held her breath, wondering if he would give in, if he would scoop her into his arms and carry her upstairs to the nearest room, where the world could vanish between their bodies.
You don't know what you do to me, he growled, his voice low.
Oh, I do, she said with defiant softness. You're afraid. You're afraid to listen, because you fear what it might change in you. Talorcan's gaze burned. He dropped his eyes to her cleavage, with an intensity that almost made her swoon. She was trembling. Was it pent-up desire, or a war within? Is that what you want? For me to take you right here, right now? He said fiercely. If that's the only way to make you listen, she replied, not breaking eye contact. If I took you, he said hoarsely, you wouldn't be talking. Your mouth would be busy with other things, and I wouldn't be in the mood to listen. He turned on his heel with a movement as sharp as it was painful, and walked out without another word. Aeryn let out a wounded sigh, a deep mix of frustration and longing. She'd had him, almost. She'd felt his resistance beginning to crack. But the man's will was tempered like the steel of an ancient sword. She knew he wanted her, the air crackled when they were near. And yet he avoided her, with the care of a man who fears destiny. Maybe deep in his soul he'd sensed the same thing she had, that they were meant to intertwine and that it would change everything. Every day was a battle against time. Talorcan's betrothed was close to arriving, and with her the threat of a sealed fate. Aeryn had confronted it twice, and both times he had fled at a gallop, like a man running from a truth too bright to accept. The night before she had tried to block the door to her room, only to discover that he had climbed out the window and scaled the stone walls, like an ancestral shadow fleeing his own heart. She had seen him at dawn, stumbling into a garden bush, naked, ethereal beneath the Celtic mist. She had done everything she could, short of throwing herself out the window. He was a man of legend, carved in the fire of ancient clans, clothed in silence and magic. And every time she saw him walk across the fields with his kilt swaying in the wind, the torture was real. She knew there was nothing under that fabric but his raw, powerful nakedness. Every thought of him turned to water in her mouth, but in other places it burned like a Beltane flame. His outbursts had not gone unnoticed. The maid's knowing glances, the guard's stifled grins. Everyone knew she wanted him. Love had no pride. But Aeryn Morwyn did. And groveling wasn't her idea of victory. She knew that when she finally tired of his games, her fury would be ancient, deep, uncontrollable. And him? Did he not realize how dangerous it was to tempt a woman whose soul was already on fire? Chapter 31. Aeryn had a plan. It wasn't perfect, but she had examined it from every possible angle, down to the last corner of her imagination. She'd had time, more than enough, to reflect on every mistake she'd made since arriving in a century that wasn't hers. Her list of failures was long, and it included nearly every action she'd taken since waking in the highlands of the 16th century. And yet, all was not lost. She was still amazed by how easily emotions could cloud reason, how the heart, wild and reckless, could drive her to act without thinking. Never in her life had she made so many blunders in such a short time. But now at last, she felt like she was taking the helm again. Like she was reclaiming, however briefly, control over herself, and soon over him. She would tell him the truth again. Every fragment. Every detail. Not this time in a rush or desperation, but with the calm that comes from deep conviction. She would speak to him from the very first moment she woke in the cave, surrounded by the living stone of the past, to that terrible moment when she lost him. She would tell him what she ate, what she said, what she wore, and what she herself did, word for word, gesture by gesture. Because somewhere in that story lay the key. A catalyst. A crack through which Talorcan's sleeping memory might slip in, and ignite the flame of remembrance. Aeryn had spent hours the night before tracing the broken line of her steps in her mind, studying the folds of time with the same reverence a druid gives to the constellations in search of omens. She thought about the arrows of time, thermodynamic, psychological, cosmological, and she hesitated. Because even if all of them pointed forward, she didn't fully believe it. There was something within her, instinctive, ancient, that told her memory wasn't linear. That the soul remembered even when the mind fell silent. She had read about quantum physics, about theories she barely understood, but which spoke to her in a strangely familiar language. She recalled Feynman's words, "No one really understands quantum mechanics." And if the wisest minds of her time didn't grasp the fabric of the universe, how could she accept that Talorcan's soul couldn't remember? To Aeryn there weren't two Talorcans. There was only one single essence manifested in different forms across the vastness of time. Like a ray of light passing through a prism, it fragments, multiplies but remains one. If he was that light, hadn't his cells preserved the imprint of every journey, every love, every battle? Perhaps his mind had forgotten, filing it away as a dream, a nighttime delusion. But she would bring him back. She would make him listen. Every word. Even if her voice was broken, he would hear her. And she knew exactly where it would happen. Determination pulsed through her veins like an ancient song. She felt small, yes, but no longer harmless. No longer willing to shrink into a corner, wounded and silent. The time for waiting was over. It was time to fight. Chapter 32. "Get in there and try it on," Aeryn ordered, her tone calm but firm. The guard shot her a suspicious look. "Go on," she insisted, irritated by his hesitation. "I'm not going to hurt you." The man looked to Shannon, who was leaning against the wall with his arms crossed and the smile of someone who already knew how this would end. At the faintest nod from him, the soldier sighed, resigned, and complied. "Can you open it?" Aeryn asked a few moments later. Muted sounds answered from within, dull thuds, restrained kicks. Then a frustrated voice. "No, my lady. There's no way." "Try again," she said, a small smile playing on her lips. "And think of 5 coins. More struggling." Another muttered curse. Aeryn nodded to herself. "Perfect." Shannon returned her smile with a knowing one of his own. The plan was in motion. At that hour the castle slept. Shadows stretched silently through the corridors, and only the distant whisper of the wind broke the stillness. Talorcan descended the stairs barefoot, his steps barely a breath against the stone. It was the 4th watch. He knew Aeryn was in her room. He had heard her arrive at dusk, had heard her sigh upon finding the door between them still barred, and her body leaning with resignation against the closed wood. Then the creak of the bed as she settled. After that, only silence. He had lain there with his hands behind his head, trying not to think of her. But the hardest thing about not thinking of something is that you must constantly remember it in order to avoid it. And he remembered her. He knew with painful certainty that she slept naked. Aeryn, sensual and untamed, surrendered freely to textures, to the feel of velvet against her fair soft skin. He imagined her wrapped in shadow, the fabric sliding over her curves like a silent caress. And that thought again and again struck him like a curse. He forced himself to shake his head sharply. He was losing his mind. Since when had he let a woman make him feel so unhinged? She was watching him. She thought he didn't know, but he did. Her presence was a wandering flame, tempting, provocative, and he, a man who had made self-control his armor, was starting to crack. Wasn't this his own castle? Why should he retreat, restrain himself, like a stranger in his own land? The idea infuriated him. He turned a corner, and stumbled over a heap of abandoned spears by the staircase. He struck his foot and cursed in 5 ancient tongues. Growling, he promised himself he'd move them to the armory by dawn. At last, he reached the corridor leading to his destination. Each step was a march toward the edge of his reason. If she wanted a battle, he thought, she would have it. He would make his intentions clear once and for all. No more empty promises, no more pretenses of honor while he burned inside like a sealed fire. And then, driven by something wild, he threw his body against the door that separated them. It barely shook. He slammed into it again. Once. Twice. 3 times. The wood held firm as if made of stone. Furious, he pounded his fists against it. Had she added reinforcements? Hidden locks? Was the entire door barred from floor to frame? He growled. Curse her stubbornness. He knew this was an especially thick door, carved for privacy, and now it was his prison. Open up, he roared, voice ragged, pounding with a closed fist. Silence. If you open it now, I'll leave you in one piece. But if not, I swear when I break through this door you'll pay for every second you've kept me out, he growled, seething. Nothing. Not a word. Aeryn. Aeryn, he bellowed, caught between desire and desperation. But from the other side, only the echo of his own name, swallowed by the ancient wood. Aeryn had already anticipated this, and had barricaded the door from her side using several spears, wedged like braces between the door and the stone wall, locking it with near mathematical precision so it couldn't give way, not even to repeated assaults. When Talorcan saw he couldn't get in through there, he decided to find another way. Driven by frustration and desire, he tried to skirt Aeryn's room, through a passage or a secondary door that led into her private wardrobe, a gallery that connected to the opposite side of her bedchamber. In his haste and confusion, he stepped into that small space without realizing Aeryn had already turned it into a trap, or that she was watching, waiting for the moment to strike. The instant he entered, she locked him in from the outside, barring the only exit. That's where she placed the spears, not just at the main door to her room, but across the exit from the space where he now found himself trapped. It was a small dark chamber, windowless, with a cupboard, a wardrobe, even an old noble latrine, and another door that led into Aeryn's room. Now it had become a symbolic prison. Aeryn had confined him to force him to listen, to remember, to break without the strength of his arms, only through memory and words. In an act of druidic cunning, she hadn't attacked him, she had contained him. She had forced introspection. She who had foreseen this moment, took the chance to bar the door from the outside, with spears placed strategically between the frame and the stone, sealing the entrance. That's how she left him there, trapped, frustrated, forced to wait, and to listen. When the sun reached its zenith, Aeryn figured Talorcan was finally ready to talk. He had already exhausted all phases of masculine pride, the loud threats, the belligerent bravado, and even a clumsy attempt at flattery. Later, in a pathetic turn, he had resorted to negotiation, offering her freedom if she let him out, 3 horses, 2 sheep and a cow. Then he sweetened the deal, a milk cow no less, a pouch of coins and even the chance to settle anywhere in England, as long as she vanished from his life forever. Aeryn had heard it all from the other side of the door, sitting on the cold corridor floor with her forehead resting against the wood that separated them. She smiled silently when she heard the only threat that ironically actually caught her attention, that he'd take her until her legs gave out. If only I were that lucky, she thought with quiet sorrow. Now silence reigned. 15 minutes without a sound. No banging, no curses. Only a heavy, waiting calm. Aeryn knew she mustn't speak first. She couldn't surrender the ground she had gained. If he believed he held control, he'd listen less. He had to make the first move. And he didn't take long. "It's not very pleasant in here, girl," he growled, his voice laced with fury and humiliation. Aeryn stifled a laugh. "It's not very pleasant out here either, you know," she shot back, mimicking his accent. "I've been waiting several nights for you to use the wardrobe. I was starting to think you never did." A grunt was his only reply. She sighed softly and pressed a hand to the door, as if she could caress the air between them. "I know it's not the most comfortable place, Talorcan. But it was the only way I could make you listen to me. You ran from your own room, tell me where else could I have reached you?" "Let me out," he replied quickly, "and I'll listen to everything you have to say." "Too easy," Aeryn murmured, letting her body slide down until she was seated on the stone floor. She wore loose trousers that weren't hers, and an unbuttoned linen shirt at the collar. She settled against the door, as if she could feel his breath on the other side. Nerya appeared with her calm stride, a small bowl in her hands. "With extra cream, just the way you like it, Aeryn," she said sweetly, setting the bowl beside her. "Oat porridge, peaches and thick cream." "Are you serving her porridge?" Talorcan bellowed from his improvised prison. "That's none of your concern," Nerya replied calmly, turning to leave. Aeryn shrugged. "Sorry, Talorcan. But this is your doing. If you'd ever been kind enough to share a light mead with me, or sit down to breakfast and talk, none of this would have been necessary. But time passes, and we have a lot to clear up." Silence. Long. Uncertain. "What do you want from me, girl?" he asked at last, tired, as though the armor of his stubbornness had begun to crack. "I want you to listen to me. I want to tell you everything I remember from our time together, in the future. I've gone over it so many times. There has to be something, some detail, some feeling that helps you remember. Maybe you just don't know it yet. But it's there. I know it is." On the other side of the door, she heard a long, deep sigh. The sound of a man who had stopped fighting, if only for a moment. "Very well, girl," he said at last. "Tell me everything. This time, I'll listen." Talorcan sat in silence, resting on the cold stone of the garderobe, legs stretched out, arms crossed over his chest and back pressed against the closed door. He closed his eyes. He didn't pray, but he wished, like an ancient druid pleading to the wind, for everything to begin. His fury had drained away, leaving behind only a faint echo of rage. Grudgingly, he admired the iron will of that girl. His outburst would have scared anyone else off, but she hadn't broken. He pictured her on the other side, standing tall in her dignity, arms crossed beneath her chest like a shield of ancestral pride, her foot tapping out the rhythm of her patience. He knew she could wait there until the sun reached its zenith, maybe longer. She was formidable. And in truth, perhaps too lucid for someone pretending to be confused. You know she's not disoriented, Talorcan muttered to himself. Why won't you admit it? Because if she wasn't confused, then she was telling the truth. And if she was telling the truth, why the hell did that disturb him so much? He found no answer. Only the confusion of knowing. He turned into a stammering fool every time he faced her. I'm 25 years old, he said suddenly, raising his voice through the door. So old, she teased, light as a mischievous breeze. My betrothed is 15. He smiled at the sound of her scoff. That, according to the Constitution, is called statutory rape in my century, he replied, his voice sharp with meaning. The Constitution. Another of those mysteries from her tongue and her time. That means in my world you could go to prison, she added with cutting calm. Talorcan snorted. And why should I care about your age? Does it have anything to do with your story? It's the long version, with some origins, she answered, then added, now be quiet. And Talorcan obeyed. Something in her intrigued him more than his own need to speak. He listened. With growing attention, as time dissolved like mist. He allowed himself to imagine her sitting as well, leaning against the door back to back. That invisible closeness without touch felt almost sacred. He sank into the sound of her voice, soft, melodic, low and steady, with a quiet confidence that seemed to rise from deep roots as if it sprang from ancient earth. Why hadn't he noticed it before? Maybe because every time he looked at her, he was blinded by desire. Now, without sight, his other senses awakened. Yes, he thought she had a sweet voice, a voice made for singing ballads of lost peoples, or for soothing a child with an ancient Celtic lullaby. He shook his head. He mustn't drift into daydreams. Not now. There was something he had to hear, something coming from far away, from her lineage or his. In the heavy silence of dawn, Nerya slipped quietly up to Aeryn, and set down a fresh jug of steaming coffee beside her, as though offering a balm to soothe the tense vigil. Then, without a word, she vanished with the lightness of a shadow. Aeryn drew a breath, and continued her tale. We climbed the hill up to the stones, but your castle was gone. Only the foundations remained, and a few walls cracked by the passing centuries. There was a whisper of disbelief, from the other side of the door. What date did you send me through the circle? March 22nd. You called it Ostara. The spring equinox. On the other side, Talorcan inhaled sharply, as if an ancient spell had just been uttered. Ostara. Few outside the druidic circle knew of that sacred connection between the stones and the liminal days of the year. Old legends whispered that the stones responded only on solstices and equinoxes, but not everyone knew how to read their voices. And how did I use the stones? He asked urgently, his voice trembling with a dormant knowledge beginning to stir. You're jumping ahead, Aeryn said with weary gentleness. If you really want to know, listen. Don't interrupt me. Tell me first and go back. How did I use them? On a level above, hidden behind the stone balustrade, Shannon and Nerya had settled into complete silence. They watched the scene below like two mute sentinels of an ancestral rite. Nerya panted lightly from the sprint she'd made from the kitchen to the tower, up the service stairs, without making more noise than a field mouse. I don't think you should be hearing this, Shannon whispered, uneasy, but stopped cold when Nerya pressed her lips to his ear. If you think that after living 12 years under this roof, I don't know exactly what's going on, you're as much a fool as Talorcan thinks Aeryn is. Shannon stared at her in amazement. His eyes widened as if he'd just witnessed a prophecy. I can read too, you know, Nerya added in a low voice, laden with an unexpected dignity. Shannon's astonishment turned absolute. You can. But Nerya raised a hand for silence. Shush, we're missing the important part. And both of them, elderly keepers of secrets greater than themselves, bowed their heads to listen, as if the echoes of that tale could alter the course of a destiny already carved into stone. Chapter 33. Listen, dreaming trees. Answer, remembering stones. From the root to the raven. From the spring to the thunder. I summon the thread that weaves the form. Air that cuts. Fire that sings. Water that carries. Earth that waits. Let the veil part. Let the sign reveal itself. Let the word be a bridge. Not a burden. I stand between worlds. With a fearless heart. And a kindled voice. You traced symbols on the stones, Aeryn whispered. You painted with earthy pigments, then broke ritual fragments inside the circle, and carved ancient signs into the inner side of each of the 13. A shiver, like an old omen, ran down Talorcan's spine. Then you drew 3 more marks on the central slab, and we waited for midnight. Talorcan muttered a Gaelic curse, barely audible. How could she know all that? Those secrets belonged to a lineage guarded with fierce devotion, passed down in whispers beneath new moons. Only he, Caelan, and his father Shannon knew the exact rites to awaken the stone's power. And now Aeryn Morwyn, a stranger, spoke of them as if she'd been there all along. Do you remember the symbols? He asked, suddenly tense. She described them one by one. Her words, though incomplete, were precise enough to chill his blood. It was impossible to fake such knowledge. Talorcan closed his eyes, fighting to deny the evidence that unsettled him. And like a man grasping at a rope in the fog, he reached for a more mundane subject, one he knew would put her on edge. You claimed I took your virginity. When did it happen? His voice, hoarse and low, seemed to brush the wood between them. On the other side of the door, Aeryn felt the vibration of his words, as if their mouths were about to meet along that thin oak line that separated them. It felt foolish, but she turned her face toward the door and answered. It was among the stones, just before we crossed. Did you know you were a virgin? No, she murmured, uncertain. What? No, she repeated more firmly. Did you lie to me? No. I just didn't think it was important enough to mention, she replied defensively. Lies, he said with tightly held anger. Withholding the truth is sometimes the same as lying. Her own words, thrown back at her with the cold precision of a well-forged blade, hurt more than she'd expected. Aeryn swallowed hard. I was afraid you wouldn't touch me if you knew. Then, almost in a whisper, she added, and you were afraid I'd leave if I knew the truth about you. We made quite the pair, didn't we? A long silence. Why were you still a virgin at 25? I never found the right man, she answered, lowering her gaze. And what would the right man be like, Aeryn Morwyn? I don't think that matters. Come on, grant me that gift. After all, you've had me locked up all day, he replied with a half-smile in his voice. Fine, she relented reluctantly. The right man would be intelligent but also playful. Kind-hearted and loyal. Loyalty's important to you. Very. I don't share. If he's mine, he's only mine. Talorcan didn't reply right away, but she could hear the smile in his tone when he said, Go on. He'd enjoy simple things, good mead, coffee, good food, a family. You want children? Dozens, she sighed. And you teach them to read, all of that? Aeryn took a deep breath. Her life had lacked balance for so long that now, with painful certainty, she knew what she wanted to pass on to her children. I teach them to read and to dream. To look at the stars and be amazed. I teach them the value of imagination, to play with the same passion as they work. She paused. And I teach them that all the brains in the world can't make up for love. Talorcan inhaled deeply, as if her words had pierced through his armor. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was charged with understanding, ancient as the stones themselves. Do you really believe love is the most important thing? I know it is. Nothing makes sense without it. She had learned that in Scotland. She had chased success, accomplishments, external validation, and without love everything crumbled like castles of smoke. How did I make love to you, Aeryn Morwyn? Her lips parted in a faint gasp. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of a promise. Of a sacred memory. They sounded like the true Talorcan, the one who had torn down her walls with tenderness and desire.
Tell me, Aeryn.
Tell me in detail.
What was it like?
She wet her lips, and in a voice that sank in tone intimate as a prayer she began to speak. Chapter 34. Shannon took Neria's hand firmly, trying to pull her away. We shouldn't be listening to this, he said in a low voice, heavy with conflict.
It's not right.
I'm not moving, Neria replied, and the stubbornness in her gaze was as unyielding as the ancient stones that guarded their land. Shannon let out a resigned sigh. For a moment he resisted, but then, defeated by something deeper than duty, he leaned once more toward the railing. And so when Aeryn began to speak, her words slid into the gloom like an ancient enchantment, and he found himself caught. Though it was Aeryn's voice, Shannon, briefly entranced, imagined it was Neria whispering those intimate confessions with trembling fervor. At first he kept his eyes down, refusing to meet hers, but then he looked up, overcome by a force stronger than will. And Neria did not look away. Her eyes, dark as rain-soaked earth, met his and held them with unshakable intensity. Shannon's heart, old and trained for restraint, beat with a strength he thought long forgotten. And then Aeryn said with a trembling voice, You told me something I'll never forget. The sweetest words anyone's ever said to me. Words so tender, so full of devotion, they pierced through me like sacred fire. You said them with that voice of yours, deep and playful. Talorcan let out a faint gasp.
What did I say?
He was alone, cloaked in shadows, his plaid pushed aside, his body straining with painful tension. Aeryn's voice had pulled him back to that moment, each word rebuilding the memory with devastating precision. It had been the most intimate and visceral experience of his life. His imagination filled in what Aeryn left out, details born perhaps from unconscious memory, or perhaps from a desire older than blood. But he no longer cared what was real and what wasn't. Because the essential truth was that he wanted Aeryn Morwyn with a force that defied all logic. He admired her strength, her way of facing even the impossible without flinching. She knew what he was, a druid, keeper of forgotten secrets. And still, she wanted him. By all the gods of Emergin, he thought with a mix of irony and reverence, Talorcan MacRhean, thrice marked by fate, was being pursued by a woman who saw him fully and did not run. He could no longer remember why he'd ever tried to resist her. The urge to surrender, to find release alone, was nearly unbearable. But he didn't want empty relief. He wanted her within and around him, flesh and spirit intertwined. What you said was so romantic, Aeryn breathed softly. Was all he managed, his breath barely restrained. And then when Aeryn spoke again, her words fell like a spell sealed in time. If something must be lost, let it be my honor for yours. If someone must be forsaken, let it be my soul for yours. If death comes soon, let it be my life for yours. I am given. That's what you said. And I answered, I am given. Talorcan jolted upright, a guttural roar bursting from his chest, but she didn't stop. Her voice held him there, caught between memory and longing. And when she finished, the warrior broke inward. His knees met the ground like in a sacred rite. A warm light, quiet as dawn over the valley, rose in his chest. Not a light seen with eyes but with the soul. Aeryn had lit in him a flame that was not just desire or passion or yearning, but all of that and something older still, an unspoken vow already sealed. He couldn't speak. He could barely breathe, as wave after wave of emotion crashed over him like an ancient sea recognizing its long-lost shore. Aeryn bent over herself, as a surge of overwhelming feeling struck her. She felt ridiculous, truly strange, as if she had just spoken something irrevocable. Och God, Neria, murmured Shannon, stunned both by Aeryn's words and by the fact that he was holding Neria's hand, and she wasn't pulling away.
She's just married him.
Married. Neria's fingers tightened around his.
Yes, the druid's vow.
I never performed that spell, not even when I bound myself to my wife. Neria's lips parted to ask why, but both fell silent at once. They leaned in, holding their breath over the stone balustrade, desperate to hear what would come next. Chapter 35. A long silence passed, thick as the mist in the high forests, until Talorcan, his voice low and edged with irony, finally broke the air between them. Ahem. You do realize you just married me, lass? Aeryn blinked, confused.
What? She exclaimed.
Please, he added dryly, would you let your husband out of the closet? The words hit her like a revelation. Married? She was married to him? Was that a marriage vow? She murmured, breath caught in her chest. Those were the druid vows, he said, with a hint of reverent wonder. An ancient sacred binding spell. I don't understand how you knew what you were saying, but… Aeryn's heart sank. He still didn't remember. After everything they'd lived, all she had revealed, every detail she had unearthed with care, he still couldn't recall her. I knew it, she said with bitter tenderness, because you told me. And no, I had no idea I was marrying you. Don't think you'll get away with this, he growled from behind the door.
I'm not trying to run, Aeryn replied firmly.
You're not? Talorcan asked, his voice vibrating with disbelief and something deeper, need. And you? Do you want to be married to me, even if you don't remember who I am? A brief, heavy silence preceded his answer.
It's too late, he said at last.
We already are. Nothing can undo it. You'd better get used to that. And he pounded the door with his fist, as if sealing the sentence in wood and fate. Aeryn looked toward him, even though the physical barrier between them made eye contact impossible. She heard him. She felt him. She knew him, beyond memory.
And what about your promise? She whispered.
Talorcan muttered something barely audible. A restrained tenderness echoed in his voice, like a vow buried beneath centuries of tradition and honor.
But there's something I still don't understand, Aeryn.
If what you're saying is true, if it all happened like you say, then I don't understand why I wouldn't have left behind a spell, a safeguard. If I'd even suspected I might not return, I would have given you an enchantment, to help me remember. I know I would have. Aeryn paled. The possibility was so simple, so obvious, it hurt. A spell, to restore your memory, she stammered. Her mind now raced down the paths of recollection, searching frantically. Had he already given her that spell? And had she not known how to use it? Or had she forgotten it on purpose, keeping it as a last resort? Then she remembered. That moment in the car, on the way to Brathren. Talorcan had looked at her and asked, "Do you have a good memory, Aeryn Morwyn?"
Oh holy God!
Was it a rhyme? She cried, placing a hand over her chest.
It might be.
And if I did leave you a spell, do you think I would have told you how to use it? He shot back, his tone accusatory, though more curious than angry. Silence settled between them again, thick and expectant. Then, with a rough sigh, Talorcan admitted, "Maybe I wouldn't have revealed it until the last possible moment." "And what if, in that last moment, you disappeared?" she asked, her voice low, heavy with pain and hope. Behind the door, only his ragged breathing could be heard. "And then?" "Say the rhyme if you have it," he shouted, urgency cutting through wood and time. Aeryn turned toward the door. She pressed her palms and cheek against it, as if she could reach him through the warmth of her skin. She closed her eyes and with a calm voice, summoned as much clarity as she could and began to speak. Talorcan stood before the door, palms flat against the fresh wood, his cheek resting gently against it. He had whispered the druidic vows of union. At the same moment Aeryn spoke them on the other side, with reverent devotion. There was no turning back. Her ancient commitment, sealed in another time and place, no longer held any weight. Now they were truly bound. And a druid's vow cannot be broken. There is no such thing as divorce in the world of the ancients. With his soul suspended in the air, he waited for her words. Her voice, melodious and steady, slipped clearly through the wood, and as he heard her he felt her words sink into him like an ancestral echo, weaving past and future in a whirlwind of light and shadow. "Where you fall, I shall be." Two flames forged into a single ember. Moving forward and back through time. If your craft withers, remember. Talorcan dropped to his knees, folding in on himself, clutching his head with both hands. A deep pain pierced through him, as if unseen forces tried to tear him apart and fuse him again under the weight of eternity. Instinctively he tried to resist, but the words struck him with the force of a sleeping truth. "You don't trust me," her voice whispered like a dream echo. "I do trust you, lass," he answered, his voice raw. "More than you could ever know." But it wasn't entirely true. He was terrified of losing her. Then the images rose, the glowing blue of druidic light, visions of Aeryn naked and surrendered, the faint gleam of a red ribbon between her lips, the white bridge suspended between realities. The words returned, an implacable whisper. "You fight me to the death. Now I see. Now I understand. It's not nature that divides us but our own fear that drives us to destroy each other. Accept me. Let us live, both of us." "I will never accept you," Talorcan roared in one final act of defiance. But he had lost. Cruelly, gloriously lost. Gritting his teeth, he summoned all his druidic will, not to rise but to surrender. To yield to the sacred bond that now tied them. "Love her," whispered the memory from the vision. "Och, Aeryn," he breathed, his soul fractured. "Aeryn, my love." Aeryn waited behind the door, holding her breath. Since she had spoken the vows, not a single sound had come. Worried, she touched the wood. "Talorcan." Silence. "Are you all right?" "Aeryn, lass, open this door right now," he commanded, breathless, trembling with urgency. "Answer a few questions first," she replied, eyes fixed on the threshold as if it might reveal a different man altogether.
"What was the name of the store?"
"Callahan's, for God's sake."
"What did you want me to buy for you?"
"Green trousers and a matching shirt. But you got me black pants, a ridiculous beach shirt, and white shoes that cost 5 pesetas. I refused to wear your blue pants and you threatened to help me, with my sword." His voice deepened, thick with satisfaction. "But your threats stopped the moment I kissed you. After that you turned surprisingly docile." Aeryn blushed. She remembered exactly how she had crumbled at the first touch of his lips. A shiver of emotion ran through her. "And what was the name of the clerk at Callahan's?" "I don't know, and I don't care. I only had eyes for you." "By the gods, what a good answer." "Open this damn door," she cried, tears blurring her vision as she broke the locks one by one. "And what was I wearing when you made love to me?"
"When I did?"
"Nothing. But before, brown shorts cut high on the thighs, a fitted blouse, gym green boots, polo sport tees, and a purple hair clip." She threw the door open.
"Which you took off with your teeth and tongue," she murmured with a sob.
"Aeryn," Talorcan exclaimed, and pulled her into his arms, devouring her in a kiss so deep and eternal it seemed to set his soul alight to its roots. She wrapped her arms around him, clinging desperately. He lifted her with ease, her legs locking around his waist. There would be no more distance between them. Never again. "Do you choose me, Aeryn? Knowing who I am?" "I always chose you," she whispered against his mouth. He laughed, relieved, and their reunion was fierce and wild, a storm of pent-up love. Clothes were torn, moans tangled, until they were both naked, burning at the foot of the Grand Hall staircase.
But time dissolved.
The century, the place, it all vanished. Only he remained. He carried her to the pantry, kicked the door shut, and pressed her against the wall. She moaned at the touch of his warrior's chest, starving for him. Every caress reclaimed lost time. Every kiss, a fulfilled prayer. "I missed you, my girl," he murmured against her skin. "I wanted you to the brink of madness." "I missed you too. I'm so sorry, Aeryn, for not trusting. Apologize later. Kiss me now." They laughed together, their laughter full of fire and life. He took her slowly, with tenderness and devotion. He loved her as if by doing so he could erase all distance and all doubt. And when she whispered it, breathless, her eyes clouded with desire, he stopped.
"What did you say?" he asked, trembling.
"I told you not to stop."
"Not that, the other thing."
Aeryn fell silent. She had let slip the words she had kept hidden until now. Ancient words, powerful, irreversible. Words a druid waits his whole life to hear. Aeryn's voice rose like a breath, laced with the warmth of a feeling long held back. Every word she spoke came from the deepest part of her soul. I love you, Talorcan. He froze, held up on his elbows, as if those words had stopped time. The echo of their meaning struck him with the force of an ancient tide. Say it again, he whispered, barely breathing. I love you, she repeated, with the sweetness of an old prayer. Talorcan inhaled sharply, as if he needed to trap those words inside him, carve them into his very being. For a moment, silence became a sanctuary, where only the miracle of what they had just shared remained. Ah, Aeryn, my little precious Aeryn, he said at last, voice breaking. I thought I would never hear those words. He brushed a strand of hair from her face to see her more clearly, then kissed her temple with the tenderness of someone touching the sacred. I love you. I worship you. I'll love you every day I breathe, he vowed. Even in your time before I knew who you were, I longed for you. You were the echo that followed me for as long as I can remember. The only one. Aeryn closed her eyes and let the moment wrap around her, as if his words were a warm mantle protecting her from the world. She held them close, making them a legacy. When he moved inside her again, slow and deep, searching for her with a desire born not of the body but of the soul, she arched into him. They found each other in a sacred rhythm, as if dancing under the gaze of the old gods. Their lips never parted, and the kiss sealed what time could never undo. It wasn't just passion. It was union. It was destiny. It was the memory of druids watching from the shadows of the eternal forest, whispering forgotten blessings. He thrust and she cried out his name like a spell. She clung to him as if she could fuse herself to him. He roared like a warrior finding home. Talorcan's hands roamed her body in reverence, worshipping every curve, every shiver, until they broke together like waves against an ancient rock. The room filled with the scent of surrender, of damp earth and warm wood, as if the forest itself had wrapped them in its embrace. Talorcan kept her at his side, wrapped in shadow and awe. He couldn't stop touching her, loving her, believing that this was real. That she from another time loved him exactly as he was, his darkness, his bloodline, his druid fire and his scars. She who had crossed centuries without a map, had clung to her fate with fierce resolve. She had spoken vows with no ritual, no altar, yet holier than any. He savored them like the finest Highland whiskey, a promise intoxicating in its depth. He asked her to say them again and again, as he explored every part of her body with reverence, as if rediscovering her after a lifetime of blindness. Only when the night reached its deepest hour did he lift her into his arms with a guardian's tenderness, gathered their clothes, and carried her to his bed. There she would sleep each night, he promised, until the end of time. Chapter 36. Selen Blaerwick stood motionless, like a statue on the verge of breaking. In one hand she clutched her hazel rods for reading fate, in the other her Bible, its pages worn by years and the oil of many prayers. Her mouth twisted, aware of her own foolishness. She knew which of the two held real power, and it wasn't the holy book. She'd had another vision. Neven bleeding from the mouth, a woman weeping, Talorcan MacRhean with a furrowed brow, and a fourth figure blurred but heavy with sorrow, as if mourning the young man's death. What could an old woman do, against the weight of destiny? How to stop the relentless wheel of what's to come with a body worn out and hands that trembled now not from fever, but from helplessness. She had begged Neven to leave, to return to Edinburgh, far from these dark omens. She feigned illness, wove lies from the thread of love, but her son had looked at her with clear eyes. Sometimes she thought he was born of her very soul, so wild and pure was his faith. Neven refused to believe in visions, let alone in the shadow of death. He had made her promise that she would not harm Talorcan MacRhean. And though Selen harbored no hatred in her chest, only the desperate wish to see her son safe, she was beginning to suspect that the only way to save Neven might be to disobey him. If she had to choose between her son's life and a stranger's, could she really hesitate? So she remained there, lost in thought, as the day turned to mist and twilight began to slip through the cracks of the house like a whisper from the other world. She was fighting a darkness deeper than night, the kind that brewed within her own heart. It was then, when the sky wore its shade of purple, and the highlands stirred with the distant call of owls and the croaking of frogs, that the silence was shattered by an unmistakable clamor, bells, voices, the thunder of hooves on damp earth. Selin jolted upright as if propelled by some invisible force, and ran to the door. She opened it just a crack, and saw them. A gypsy caravan was crossing the road. She counted 17 wagons adorned with bright fabrics and flowing silks, drawn by spirited horses. The noise was deafening. They passed in the direction of Tir Naraith, carrying with them music, secrets, and the promise of forbidden knowledge. She remembered what Nevin had told her long ago. Every spring, the MacRhean druids camped near the MacRhean estate. They sold amulets, read destinies, danced around the fire, and wove stories with the locals. And the next year some maidens would give birth to children with dark eyes and copper skin. She trembled, shut the door quickly and leaned against it, chest heaving, conscience overflowing. But as the night settled in, something else began to take shape within her. A possibility. A dark path, yes, but one without blood. With the help of the Caelanic, masters of ancient spells and enchantments offered alongside their herbs and charms, perhaps she could stop the tragedy without staining her hands. She wouldn't harm Talorcan, only neutralize him. Keep him at the edge of time's flow, suspended where he could neither hurt nor be hurt. Yes, she would have to seek out those wandering creatures. Face their wild eyes, their tents thick with sin and mystery. But if that meant protecting Nevin, her only son, her flesh, her light, then she would face any darkness. Shannan and Neria had fled without looking back the moment Aeryn freed Talorcan from his cell. It wasn't curiosity that drove them, but a kind of instinctive reverence, as if witnessing what happened behind that door would be a violation of something sacred. They ran breathless, climbing the 100 stone steps in a blind rush until they reached Shannan's tower. Once there, when Neria's heart finally slowed its frantic rhythm, she realized with a jolt that she was sitting on his bed, facing him. She tried to get up, but Shannan's steady hands held her gently at the waist. He lifted her face with a soft touch and looked into her eyes, as if trying to read in them all the winters they had both endured alone. In those dark pupils glimmered golden sparks, like embers glowing beneath years of ash. Then slowly, like one approaching an ancient altar, he lowered his lips to hers. Neria held her breath. It had been more than a decade since she'd kissed a man. Would she even remember how? "It's been a long time since I kissed a woman," he said, his voice rough.
"You'll have to be patient with me, Neria.
You may have to remind me of the finer points." His honesty, so disarming, swept Neria's fears away. She had never seen Shannan court anyone. She had always assumed he had simply given up on love. What if he'd been as lonely as she all these years? "Since my wife died," he added, as if answering her silent thought. She couldn't speak. She only lowered her head in acknowledgement. The first touch was a whisper of wind, timid, soft, as though he feared she might shatter. He didn't rush, didn't demand. He kissed her lips lightly, then her nose, her chin, the corners of her mouth. Every gesture carried such unspoiled tenderness that Neria felt time itself slip backward. The second kiss was warm. The third, encouraging. By the fourth her soul was dancing some long-forgotten jig, and the fifth was a promise without words. When they finally parted, Shannan spoke with unexpected gentleness. "Och, Neria, there's a question I've wanted to ask you for years. And now, if you'll allow me, I'll dare to be nosy. What in God's name happened to you that night, the night I found you?" Tears welled in Neria's eyes. Shannan wrapped his arms around her and held her close to his chest, where the pain could finally breathe out. "I've been a fool for far too long," he murmured. "So many things I should have said, but didn't. Out of fear." "You? Afraid?" Neria whispered, incredulous.
What could Shannan MacRhean possibly fear?
I feared I couldn't heal your pain. Feared I'd ruin everything that you'd run, my boys care for you so much. I was afraid you'd think I was odd." "You are odd," Shannan, Neria said, and meant it. He let out a sigh that had been trapped in him for years. "I feared you wouldn't love me." The words Neria couldn't bring herself to speak hovered on her lips, trembling. They were ancient words, fragile, capable of wounding or healing. So instead of speaking them, she did the only thing she could, she gave them to a kiss. And in that kiss, she let her heart find its way home once more. Chapter 37. In the oak clearing, where only the deer know. We gave each other the names not written in books. The names only roots and ravens understand. And let the wind marry us in secret. The flickering light of dozens of candles filled the laird's chamber with a soft golden glow, as if time itself had paused in an enchanted breath. Aeryn's body lay wrapped in the warmth of a passion shared so many times, she had lost count. Every inch of her skin burned sweetly with the memory of Talorcan's kisses, every muscle knew it had been loved with an ancient devotion. She looked at him, still in disbelief. Her Talorcan. Her warrior of centuries, found again. His bronze skin gleamed like copper in the candlelight, and his dark hair like black silk caught glints of another age. You meant it about making love to me until my legs gave out, Aeryn whispered with a tired smile. By Emergin woman, it tormented me to see you walking around the castle. I watched you just as much as you watched me. Had I restrained myself any less, I would have been the one stalking your steps. Pity you didn't do it sooner. I felt rather rejected, she replied, half joking, half wounded. He leaned over her, resting on his elbows, and brushed a lock of hair from her face with a tenderness that seemed to come from another century. Forgive me, Aeryn. For being a medieval stubborn mule, who didn't believe me at first, she teased again. For that and so much more, he murmured, somber. For not preparing you better. For being afraid to fully trust you. Neria told me about your 3 vows, she interrupted gently. She said fear ruled you. And I understood, you didn't believe me because you thought I'd leave you. You should have known me better, he murmured. Talorcan, you woke up 5 centuries in the future. I didn't fully trust you either. I tend to hide my intelligence. If I'd been more honest, maybe you would have been too. Never hide it from me, he whispered. I love that part of you. But there are more things I must ask forgiveness for. For marrying me without telling me. Aeryn joked, then added more seriously, are we really married? Can we make it official? In a church? With a beautiful dress? We're more married than any priest could declare, but yes. I want to marry you, before everyone. I'll wear the Caer Thalanis regalia, and you'll wear a gown fit for a queen. We'll feast for days. It will be a rite for eternity. There was a pause. A shadow of something still unsaid danced in the sky-blue depths of Talorcan's eyes. But there's something else, something for which I must beg your forgiveness. I stole you from your time, Aeryn. I brought you to my century without asking. She slid her fingers beneath his jaw, then through his hair, caressing him like one might soothe a sacred beast. She kissed him tenderly 3 times before speaking. During the ritual, for a moment I thought you'd left me. That you'd gone back to your time and abandoned me. I felt like you were beginning to fall in love with me. I did. I do, he exclaimed. If that night you'd asked me to go with you to the 16th century, I would have said yes without hesitation. I want to be with you. Wherever. Whenever. Talorcan lowered his voice, searching her eyes for the truth that haunted him. You don't hate me for not being able to return you? I can't, Aeryn. There's no way back. She shook her head softly. I don't want to go back. I knew it from the first moment. I belonged to you even before I knew you. I tried to run, to find excuses, but I couldn't. Fate wove us together. I felt it, and it scared me. He smiled, and the light of that smile melted away centuries of silence. From the moment I saw you, I began to love you. That night on the stones when you offered me your innocence and honored me with your trust, while I recited my druid vows, I understood I would rather have one single night with you, even if it meant loving you from afar for the rest of my life, than live without ever having met you. I swore that if fate gave me another chance, I would treat you like a queen. I would live to heal what I had taken from you. I only ask one thing, Talorcan, Aeryn whispered, caressing his face with tenderness. Love me. Love me, and I'll want for nothing else. What is not love? Not everything that burns is love. Some fires consume without giving warmth. Some bonds are woven from fear disguised as promise. And some presences are not company, but a mirror of our absences. The heart once wounded learns to mistake hunger for tenderness, loneliness for attachment, desire for salvation. But true love does not demand. It asks for no proof, begs for no guarantees. True love does not impose, it reveals itself. It is not needed, it is shared. We do not love to be completed. We love because in the other, we recognize something that reminds us of what we have always been, and forgotten. Chapter 38. Under the shadow of the stars, between whispers of skin and soul, Aeryn spoke. Why can't you cross the stones? You said they were never used for personal reasons. So why do you use them? Talorcan held nothing back. He opened the gates of an ancient legacy before her, the druidic bloodline that had birthed him, his ancestors' service to the Tir Naraith, the great war of the sages, and the oath that bound him to the Caer Thalanis. He had been chosen and trained to heal, to restore balance where others had broken it and scarred Gælia.
The last time the stones were invoked, we sent 2 fleets of Templar knights 20 years forward in time.
They carried with them the cup of Dagda. They were to hide it again, he said, his voice heavy with centuries.
The cup of Dagda.
Aeryn whispered, breathless. Does it have anything to do with the Holy Grail?
That's what some called it.
But its true name is older than any Christian altar. The cup was not made by human hands. It belongs to the old gods, to the Tuatha before the fall. It heals, nourishes, reveals. That's why Philip the Fair wanted it. He sought to make it an instrument of absolute power. Had he obtained it, the balance between worlds would have been broken forever. And the Templars?
Not all served Rome.
Some listened to the earth. They were chosen to carry the cup to a safer time. Only they and the Caer Thalanis knew how to cross without breaking the laws of the cycle. They fell silent, wrapped in the mist of the sacred. The stones, like those of Brathran, can only be used for a greater good. Never for the desire of a single man. Aeryn nodded, her expression shadowed by memories. I understand. I once faced something similar, she confessed. Talorcan brushed her nose tenderly. Tell me. I want to know everything about you. She turned toward him, their foreheads touching on the soft pillow, their hair gold and night intertwined. With palms pressed together, Aeryn opened herself as she never had before. She spoke of her great rebellion. Since childhood she had grown under the banner of science, encouraged by parents whose reverence for knowledge bordered on the sacred. She had followed the path unwaveringly, driven by a genuine love for truth and imagination. Until one day something changed. At 23, she realized that her research, a theory that would transform the understanding of water and with it, the perception of the world, could be used for devastating ends. The implications were terrifying, weapons that could disrupt not just Earth, but the very fabric of the universe. That same night, she burned the laboratory. The flames consumed years of work, secrets no one else would ever know. The fire was ruled an accident. But Aeryn knew the truth. Days later, she left the university. Her father never even commented on her departure. She never looked back. I burned it all. I walked away from their world. I took refuge in a simpler life, far from power, in the safety of words, controversial ones, she finished with a shadow of a smile. Talorcan looked at her with reverent awe. The woman before him was his equal, in intelligence, in passion, in courage. She understood. She knew what the stones meant. I'm proud of you, Aeryn, he murmured, and she smiled. They kissed as if they had all the time in the world, with an ancient love that stirred among ruins and hope. Then Talorcan spoke in a grave tone. They say that if a Caer Thalanis uses the stones for selfish ends, the souls of the fallen druids, dark spirits from the Great War, can possess him. They wander trapped between worlds, hungry for a body. I won't risk such madness. When Caelan died in the other reality, I couldn't break my vow. He paused. The mention of his brother brought unease to his eyes. But Caelan is alive, Aeryn said softly.
You sent guards with him.
I know, but having two realities inside me is torment. I feel his death as if it still happened.
You're worried about him.
No. I have my beloved wife. You're worried about him, she repeated firmly. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. He didn't remember the exact date of his brother's death, only that it was approaching. Could you make it in time? Aeryn asked. Only if I ride without pause, Talorcan nodded. Then go. Bring him back. I'll be fine. I can't imagine letting him die if you can stop it. Talorcan tried to joke. Are you already throwing me out of your bed? But there was vulnerability behind his jest. Aeryn took his hand. I don't want you to go, but I couldn't bear losing him if you could save him. We have the rest of our lives.
Yes, we do, he said before kissing her slowly, deeply.
Then, with a sudden spark, he added, I'll take the chance to settle a small matter, Ethne. That girl has no idea of the power she carries. I'll break that betrothal and bring her back. After that, I'll make love to you until you can't move. 2 weeks. At least. And then we'll figure out who dared to abduct you, said Aeryn, serious again. We still have that mystery. Talorcan darkened at the memory. I never saw their faces. I could barely stay conscious. They drugged me. From now on, I'll prepare everything you eat or drink, said Aeryn with no room for debate. And how do you plan to get out of my bed? You'll see. I won't risk losing you again. They spoke about possible enemies. There weren't many. None really. Maybe someone wanted to steal Caer Thalanis' knowledge, but then why keep him alive? February 18th, Talorcan murmured.
That's the day I was taken. Then we have time to stop it, Aeryn said with certainty.
Go, bring your brother. Shannon and I will make a list of suspects. We'll talk more when you return.
I don't want to leave you.
She swallowed hard. She didn't want him to leave either, but she knew he had to. If she had a brother, she would do the same.
You have to, she told him.
I would only slow you down. You can't take me with you. Talorcan stood. He looked at her stunned. Sitting among jade green velvet blankets, her skin still glowing with love, she was like a goddess born from twilight. The most beautiful sight I've ever seen, he said, voice rough.
You'll come back, said Aeryn.
And when you do, don't move. I want to find you just as you are now. Might take me 4 or 5 days to return, he teased. And me 4 or 5 to walk again, she said, blushing. He laughed, kissed her again, and finally crossed the threshold.
But before leaving, he poked his head back in.
I love you, Aeryn. She fell back onto the bed, her heart overflowing. Say it, he called from the hallway. I love you too, Talorcan, she replied, smiling like a girl who has finally found the place she belongs. He smiled and was gone. Destiny awaited them.
But for the first time, love was their banner.